Thank you.
Good morning, all.
All right, it's 9:30, so I'd like to get the committee of the whole meeting of October 27th, 2020. I'd like to call that to order. Are there any additions to the agenda today? Nope, no one has anything? Okay. May I have a motion to approve today's agenda as presented? Okay, Councillor Kelleher-MP, all in favor? Okay, that's carried. Next is approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any adjustments, calculate, or corrections to be made to those minutes? Okay. Having none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of last committee of the whole agenda? Councillor McGrath, all in favor? Okay, that's carried. Keep losing my agenda here. Again, doing what the mayor recommended, having two screens. It's helpful when the one that you're using for the agenda stays open. Okay, so business arising from the minutes. Agenda item number 5. Does anybody have anything to bring up or discuss?
No.
Okay. All right, I had an explanation on on a question that I had about the MOST and ICIP funding that we had, and there was some wording in there that said the full information report was in today's agenda. That meant the last agenda, not today's official agenda. So maybe that question will come up a little later as we go through the budget. Okay, so having no more business arising from the minutes, unless I missed someone's hand. Okay, I just wanted to say that right now I'm reporting, or I'm chairing this meeting in the council committee room down at the Cultural and Library Center. Only for the main reason was to show my gratitude towards Mr. Furcho's involvement in the community and our municipality. And I'm sitting here in this room because Mark got it done. And, you know, I just wanted to show my appreciation and my admiration for things that he taught me as a counselor, to be a better counselor and a better human being overall. Mark brought a lot of good qualities to our municipality and to our community, and I will be grateful. And as long as this building stands, it will always be a reminder of Mark's dedication and hard work to get things done. It's also a testament to his ability to bring people together, not only the people that had to get this building erected and operating, but also with how he brought us closer with Parks Canada and vice versa, and the collaboration with our other resort municipalities, as in Banff and Canmore, in working towards getting some resort municipality status, which we still haven't officially got yet, but Mark put a lot of tireless work into that, and hopefully we'll see it come to its fruition one day. So again, I'm sitting here and I'm grateful. And I just wanted to say that I had an opportunity to chair Mark's last meeting with council, and it's an honor for me to have worked with you. Thanks. Gee, I hope he was listening.
Thanks, Rico. I really appreciate those kind words, Rico. That means a lot to me, and I'm sure council will have much success with your next CAO and with John, and I'm looking forward to the future and what's coming for Jasper. So I think you guys will be in good hands. So thank you.
well, you set the bar, and our community is a more vibrant and safe place because of you being part of it. And thank you again. All right, now that all that mushy stuff is over with, let's get back to business. We're on agenda item number 6, policy and governance. We had this added as a regular reoccurring, or these two as regular reoccurring items on our agenda. 6.1 is a public health update and concerns. Does any councillor want to provide any information or request information? Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota. More or less just hoping to initiate a conversation with council. We touched on it last week when we decided to move back to Zoom meetings, and perhaps a discussion should be initiated on a threshold or a potential threshold of where council sees the cases in Jasper as a threshold to go back to meeting in council chambers versus Zoom, and perhaps agree to a threshold or a minimum number where, you know, if say cases are below 3 in the community, we meet in council chambers, and if it's above a certain number, we meet on Zoom, just so we're all aware of each week how we move through this process.
Well, I certainly appreciate the thought behind that. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And in following up on Councillor McGrath's comments, I think there's more than just numbers that would have to be involved. We don't know the details of the number now, but we know that good numbers at the Jasper Park Lodge, and I'm sure got released to the press in a hurry. I think it's the areas of spread that would be a concern. So if we're always concerned that the area of spread might be in a restaurant, and it hasn't occurred. So it's occurred around the public buildings, in the public area, gathering areas, and our quorum room is close to that. So I would think that we would have to consider other factors than just a number before we're to meet back in that room. And you know, the other facilities that we're considering, I think it's more than just a number. But it's unfortunate what's going on. Hopefully we can eradicate this quickly. I understand that there's going to be ways that we could test people quicker with the new facilities coming in, so that the sooner we test, the easier it is to keep the spread. So hopefully we can arrest that pretty quickly. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Does anybody else have anything to add? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate the suggestion by Councillor McGrath of a threshold. And I think that something objective is a target that we could move towards. But I think recognizing also that from the outset of the pandemic, we have recognized that this is a public health issue. So we have to take guidance from the public health professionals. So certainly I think if we remain in blue, that is a bit of a threshold. But at some level less than 10 infections, we might want to consider it. But rather than necessarily pick a target number ourselves, I agree that with Councillor Journeau, there are many factors, but all of them health driven. And we have always acknowledged that we are in a supporting position to advance a public health initiative to keep our community, our residents, our visitors, and our economy safe. So I think apart from looking at a threshold as a number, which might be one factor, there are other factors as well that we should consider, but it's worth, I think, having that discussion so that we don't leave it just hanging in the wind. But we could look also at things like demand. Is there a need for us to convene in person? If there's not, we seem to be fulfilling our role, I think, effectively on this format. I see nothing that would really compel us to go back, even if numbers came down by 3 or 4 infections. So a range of issues to be considered. I don't have an answer, but I think it's a great suggestion by Councillor McGrath, and it certainly deserves some more consideration and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I do find some greater level of achievement when we meet in person. But if the numbers ebb and flow, we might find ourselves meeting in person and having virtual meetings. And I think you're right, just having some consistency throughout until something stabilizes in the low range or 0 for quite some time. I think that's when we could start meeting back in person again. Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Before I move on to 6.2, would anyone else like to add to 6.1? Okay, Councillor Butler.
I think all I would add is I was going to make similar comments to what Mayor Ireland mentioned. I like the idea of having some kind of a threshold or a standard that we would use to inform a decision of coming back to in-person meetings. And I would like to look at whether there's something within provincial guidelines that we could look at and use. But I confess I don't know what that is, but maybe we can have a broad look at provincial guidelines and see if there would be some information therein to help us make that decision when that time comes. Because I don't like to find ourselves in a position of sort of second guessing provincial regulations. I do note that Dr. Dana Hinshaw just recently suggested that masks should be worn in the workplace. And so if that's the case, it makes it difficult for us to meet if we would consider council chambers to be a workplace, because we would perhaps feel we should be masked. And it's more difficult, I would say, to hold a meeting in person masked than it is to hold a meeting on Zoom.
Those are some good points. I see a thumbs up. Anyway, thank you for bringing that for discussion, Mr. Mayor.
Just before we leave the topic, Deputy Mayor Demota, I would be interested if administration has any update to provide. I know on the agenda it's listed as council discussion, but it's also an opportunity for administration to update us. And with the new status that has been awarded to the community, I presume that there have been ongoing discussions between our administration and Alberta Health Services. So if there is any sort of update that administration has that they could pass on, that would be appreciated. But I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. If there is none, there is none. That's fine.
Sorry, Mr. Greathead, good morning, go ahead.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor and Council. We haven't received anything further than the upgrade when we switched to that level where we went to the blue zone. And AHS has indicated that they will be advising us as we go back and forth over that threshold of 10 cases. So right now, my understanding is we're sitting at 14 within the community. There's been 2 resolved to my understanding, and 14 current cases of infection. So there's not much more for administration to pass on than what's already been disseminated at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Greathead. Councillor Butler, you had a question.
I wanted to correct myself. The directive or suggestion from Dr. Dina Hinshaw about wearing masks in the workplace is actually directed to city of the Edmonton and Calgary zones and not to the province broadly. So just wanted to be clear on that. I just looked it up and realized I'd misspoken.
All right, thank you. If there's no more conversation for 6.1, I'd like to move forward to 6.2. Thanks for everyone's contribution. And again, thank you, Councillor McGrath, for bringing that forward. 6.2, Council Strategic Priorities Update. Does any councillor have anything that they want to discuss under this topic? Councillor McGrath?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota. I would just like to mention, for the knowledge of the public that may be watching or watching the recording later on, that of course, with our CAO leaving the community council's direction and strategies have been not necessarily changed, but that we've been spending a significant amount of time in the hiring process of a new CAO for the municipality of Jasper, and allowing the public to understand how much time and commitment that's required, and also how invested we are in obtaining and hiring a new CAO for the continuation of success within our community, and how important it is for us. So though we might not have any updates on strategic priorities on a meeting like today, and not much to say, that council has been working hard and very diligently on so many aspects of the wellness and of our community and the wellness of our organization.
Thank you for that. Thank you for adding some clarity to our behind the scenes process. We have been working quite diligently and extensively on that aspect, and that's our #1 priority right now, is to get that position filled with, you know, a good person. So we're looking forward to that when we achieve it. Councillor Butler.
I wanted to mention this, one of our priorities listed in our strategic priorities document under economic health and fiscal equity is to advance and improve fairness and equity in taxation. And a bullet point says continuing to work toward fairness and transparency in the property assessment process. And I mention that because later in the agenda, we have an item relating to private home accommodations, and I have comments in relation to that strategic priority, but I will bring them up under that agenda item rather than here for context. And I think it's important to note that our strategic priorities contain a number of references toward improving equity within our tax assessment process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I look forward to those discussions. Anyone else for 6.2? Okay. That brings us to the most exciting part of our agenda today. Agenda item 7, brief updates, and more so 7.1. Should I call for a recess now, or are we going to hold our breath? And all right, let's move forward. I see that your screen's lit up, Mr. Greathead. You'd like to start on the top of this discussion?
Yes,
Thank you,
Mr. Deputy Mayor. At this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Ms. Malinchuk and Christine Nadon. They've done an awful lot of work on preparing this, and there's no point in me trying to retranslate, and I don't want to get anything missed. So again, Ms. Malinchuk and Ms. Nadon have been putting an awful lot of work into this, so I'm just going to turn it over to them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Greathead, our new acting CAO. Ladies, who'd like to start?
That would be me, Deputy Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you. What I'll start with today is walking through the recommendations that we've outlined in the report, and Mrs. Malinchuk will take over with more of the financial information as we progress. So essentially, what you see on the agenda package here is what we came up with as recommendations to allow council to step through this process and sort of get an idea of what may come in the future and what the timelines are. And so starting with the 2021 tax funded expenses, so that is the operating budget based on the municipal requisition on property taxes. And as we've discussed over the last several meetings, we've been discussing that council set a target municipal tax requisition of a specific dollar amount, and that would help administration develop the operating budget towards that target, as opposed to coming with a figure that is generated administratively for then council debate, is how we've done it in the past. So that's a bit of a change in process there. And the sub bullets are just highlighting that that target is by no means a formal approval of the 2021 operating budget. It's just to guide the development of the documents that would eventually lead us there. And the importance of setting that target number sooner than later. So the recommendation from administration in there is that November 3rd meeting, being the next week's regular meeting, if council's in a position to set that target dollar amount, that would give us the time we need to draft the operating budget for consideration at public budget meetings. So the public budget meetings cannot take place until we have a document for council to consider, essentially. Kind of skipping a few steps there, which goes into the next area. So the second recommendation is that council review the attached 2021 service levels document and begin identifying areas for service level adjustments to work towards meeting the target municipal tax requisition for 2021. So the first step is to set a target. The second step is to work with the service levels document and identify where those levels are going to be adjusted and where the increased or decreased funding is going to be positioned in that document. And that is the big part of the work that needs to happen is council focusing in on those areas and working with administration to develop what that looks like into an operating budget. So the intent is for council to be directly involved in those service level decisions and administration to support that process, but that is input we require from council at this point. We do think the service levels discussion should be held during public council meetings, allowing for staff input on potential impacts. So if there's consideration to a specific area, that we can provide some information from the ground to see how that would work, and ensuring that the public is aware of the proposed changes. This would all happen ahead of the public budget meetings. So when we get to the public budget meetings, what is on the table for consideration for final approval is then developed into the operating budget. The last bullet in the tax funded expenses part is that council determine a date as the final decision date for the 2021 operating budget. We don't want to paint ourselves in a corner here. We need a date that's realistic so the work can take place, but also not having a target might make things a bit more difficult to keep driving in the next few months. So we do end up with an approval of an operating budget in a timely fashion, a timeline that works for council, of course, and a timeline that facilitates administration's work in that sense as well. So that is the tax part. And then the utility fees are a completely different process, but also impact the operating budget. So it's a process that's going to unfold concurrently with the tax discussion. And what administration is proposing for 2021 is that council consider changing the utility fee structure to allocate the costs of providing services more equitably between users and to increase transfers to reserves. So that is a recommendation from administration that we are not putting enough away annually to fund the maintenance, repair, replacement of our aging infrastructure. And hence the second bullet, we thought that was a good policy framework for council to work within to set a target amount of increase in dollars to transfers to utilities would help us sort of figure out the ballpark that would be acceptable for council politically. And then from there, we could work on the model and integrate that. And there's a few more considerations in here about a tiered rate model and things like that. So again, that target would not replace formal approval of the utility rates through the utility fees bylaw. That is the final approval for those. And developing the rate model is some of the work ahead. The bylaw must be passed before the end of the year or potentially first regular meeting in January, depending on the timeline there. So so the revenue calculations for the year are accurate. And then the other area, in addition to setting a target amount for increased transfer to utilities reserves, another consideration for council is to consider a fee ratio or a percentage increase, or what would be politically palatable to transfer to essentially commercial users, the high volume users, to be covering more of the capital renewal cost is the idea behind this. But there's what would work in the community for those businesses, for those high users, is a question that is a good one for council to consider and provide input on. Under general, we put in there that we will require some focused conversation, namely around the service level documents is the way I see this unfolding. There's another committee of the whole coming up in November. There's a couple actually, but council could also call an extra meeting as required. And also reflecting the bullets earlier in the document that the public meeting budget dates will probably need to be adjusted if we want to have an operating budget that's ready for public consideration and debate by council in that format. All that work needs to happen before we get there. So potentially a busy agenda and a lot of important matters to discuss. And but that's how we broke it down. So I'm not sure if I should invite questions on the proposed process at this point, or if council would prefer to, the next step is hearing the presentation from Mrs. Malinchak on the financials. So however council would like to proceed there.
Do any councillors want to ask for any clarification on anything that's presented thus far before we go forward? And not on the stuff that's going to be presented? Okay, I think there are none. Oh, okay, Councillor Butler, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and Deputy Mayor through to Ms. Nadon. Thank you for that concise explanation. I appreciate it very much. I have no questions about the process. I have one question about the utility rates proposal, and if this question is going to be answered in what follows, then I'm happy to leave it. But I noticed that there are a couple of statements relating to inequity in utility fees. The implication is that our utility fees are not equitably distributed, or utility costs are not equitably distributed now. Because we're on a consumption-based utility model where users pay according to their use, I think most people would consider that to be an equitable model. And I'm wondering what administration sees as the inequity that needs to be addressed. Again, if that's coming up, I'm happy to wait.
Councillor Demota, if I may, through to Councillor Butler.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, I was just making sure I was unmuted here.
Yeah.
I don't know that the answer to this question is coming directly, but I can certainly offer a bit of insight into what administratively we feel might be an inequitable distribution of our costs. And Mr. Greathead is actually the expert when it comes to utilities. But for example, our recycling fees are the exact same for commercial and for residential. So as a homeowner, I pay for the same cost for recycling fee annually than a hotel does. So that's one area. Consumption-based, you are right. You are correct in saying that we are consumption-based when it comes to water, because we actually meter it. There's been some conversation around sewage, which is not metered, which is a bit more difficult to calculate. But solid waste and recycling are half of our utility products, and those are not consumption-based. So there's an area where changes can be implemented. But also, if I'm not mistaken, the water rate is also, the cost, it goes back to the cost of providing services for the entire community, including its visitors, and who has responsibility for paying for the cost of infrastructure renewal, namely around that. And, as a 5,000 population community, we would not require a wastewater treatment plant that's the size that it is if we didn't have our visitor population coming into play. And council seeking more equity in user fees, I believe is the statement in the council strategic priorities. Administration stating that our inequities is probably building off of that line or of that reasoning. I do not have more detailed examples or information to provide, but that is the general thought. I hope this helps, maybe.
Councillor Butler, does that help?
It's helpful. I think much discussion needs to be held there. The bulk of our costs are in, I think, water delivery and wastewater treatment. And both of those fees are consumption-based. So as I see it, the largest users are already paying more than the smaller users. So I'm just curious to understand further how we can increase equity or where equity is lacking, but there is much discussion to be had, and I'm certainly satisfied with that answer for the time being. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we move forward, I'd like to have this presentation go through its entirety, but if there are any councillors that have a question or would like to raise something as we're going through it, if you think it's important, just try to chime in through audio, because I can't see, I don't have a gallery view when the screen's being hijacked. So yeah, feel free to just chime in and ask for some clarity, and I won't be offended. And you should have the opportunity to do that anyway. Okay, so Mrs. Malinchak, would you like to start?
Good morning, Council. Yes, so I take it everyone can see my screen this morning as I've shared it onto the link. Okay, great, thank you. And so yes, this is a bit of just a initial workshop, and I'll go through the slides here quickly, just a small itinerary, some things to keep in mind, going over the numbers and what the departmental needs are going forward. And also then just highlighting the service level document that is attached to the agenda as well. This is quite an informal presentation. So as the Deputy Mayor has alluded to, please do chime in if there are any questions. I won't be offended at all either. So just you can cut me off at any point if you feel that you can, the question be better answered at that point. And so these slides will focus on budget as well as service levels to give more information. And it's an opportunity for discussion for council at this point, maybe to give some direction through committee of the whole, but no direct decisions would be made until the next regular council meeting, which is next week. So that being said, some numbers to think about. So in 2019, our tax requisition was $7,982,000. In 2020, the tax requisition was brought down to $7 million. What we're going to discuss for 2021 is bringing back the tax requisition back to the 2019 numbers. And this is from prior discussions with council that council would like to hear more about bringing it back to those same numbers from 2019. However, we will also discuss some non-discretionary costs that occurred in the past 2 years. So those non-discretionary costs would be anything from, you know, insurance as well as utility rates, debentures and whatnot. And there's also another number to consider, and that is the tax requisition of 2019 plus the non-discretionary that we will talk to about prior to going into the service level request. So this is additionally some what the directors and managers have brought to the table and feel that they would not be doing their job correctly if they didn't tell council exactly what they need to run the services that we provide for the municipality. So again, there's our numbers that we'll be discussing, and just keep in mind in 2021, an increase of every 70,000 would represent 1% increase in the municipal tax levy. So first off, we'll talk about the non-discretionary costs, and right now they're calculated at just over 447,000. So all in all, we'd be looking at my comma is in the wrong place, nearly 1.5 million of an increase. To go over some of these areas of increase, now you'll see a negative amount and in salaries and benefits. That is because daycare will offset any incremental increases over the past 2 years that would have occurred. Being that daycare cannot operate at its full capacity, they will not require as much staffing needed going into 2021. Therefore, it offsets all of the increases that we were looking at for the 2 years in going forward. There's also the communications position that was also approved in 2020. So that's 67,000 that was approved in a prior meeting in council. Utilities, we're looking at 110,500. So that's over 2 years as well. Now, something else to keep in mind, in 2020, we were able to reduce those utilities quite substantially by not operating some of our facilities for some time during COVID. So if you can think about the pool not operating and all the utilities going there, the arena not operating as it normally would, even though there's still renovations going on. So there are some decreases there. So, but over the 2 years, you're still going to see those increases coming back online. There's insurance. On the tax side, 16,500. There are some embedded into the utility side as well. Recreation debt and transfer to reserves, 98,000. So this is also an odd area where to explain it, it's hard to do it without showing on a whiteboard or whatnot. But over the years, what occurred was that there was a debenture planned for and taxed for in 2019. And then we went into the debenture later in that year. So the payments didn't occur until 2020. So I was able to do a request for decision where we transferred the amounts to reserves to offset the first year of payments. So then that came offline, and that's why you'll see that increase for the payments going into 2021. And then also we're looking at a decrease in revenue for recreation due to COVID-19. Again, that'll probably be due mostly to the ability to how many people we'll be able to have into our facilities at a given time. Something to consider with this though is that the MOST grant might be able to contribute to the first quarter, or maybe $30,000 of any kind of decreases in revenue. And who knows what will go forward with that MOST grant, and whether or not maybe even if they'll be extending the date depending on how second phase of COVID plays out. Now, this is as the MOST grant is set out for a safe restart. And it also will encompass covering any costs incurred due to COVID, as well as any decreases or loss, of revenue that has occurred from COVID-19. So that can come into play in that amount that we've planned. But again, as you know, I always plan on worst case scenario going forward. So there's other notable increases here. So in 2020, if we're comparing back to 2019 and talking about that number, in 2020, there's two figures that came on board that weren't in 2019, and that's for emergency management and emergency social services. So this is in the fire department as well as in CFS for 17,000 and 24,600. And those were amounts set for emergency preparedness and good thing we had those going forward into the next year, given that we had COVID hit in 2020. Also, some things that we'll be discussing is that there is a bylaw staffing transition possibility that has been brought up to council in RFDs in the past that equates to 23,200. And then there's external requests that I put into the budget because of the requests coming to me from the library, museum, habitat, and JAG. So those are those increases that you see there. So this next slide goes over service delivery increases. And this is what I alluded to in what was brought forward by managers, directors on what is needed to provide the service levels that we currently offer to the community. In finance and administration, small 15,000, and this is to start making sure that we're contributing to IT reserves. Especially this year, we saw a lot of increases in needs for IT given COVID and our demands with having to be online all the time and people working from home. So that's setting up those reserves and adjustments also to actual needs going forward. There's community and family services, a small amount of 5,700 over and above, and this is to which is an offset of reallocation of maintenance costs, as well as computer hardware and software as well. Culture and recreation, this is a $75,000 increase in reserves to get us back to normal and to a suitable allocation amount from the prior year, as well as $73,000 in reallocation of maintenance wages. And those reallocation of maintenance wages you'll see from operations increase, and that's salaries and benefits. And it's the service that is provided to each facility in what maintenance gives to each department. So just so that that's clear. If you didn't see the increase in each department, you would just see it as an increase in operations. So it's just separated and distributed by the amount of service that is provided to each facility by operations. And also there's a $22,000 increase in needed services or based off of prior year trends. In ops, you'll see the amount of 472,300. Now, a lot of this is based on salaries and benefits, and that's around 200,000 that we would be looking at. And that's why you see those transfer to reserve, or sorry, transfer to or reallocation of maintenance costs in other areas. There's also 150,000 increase in reserves, get them back to normal. And also, as Ms. Nadon had suggested and spoke about, our infrastructure is aging, and we are currently not putting enough away to our reserves to handle the aging infrastructure going ahead. And $180,000 in materials, goods, and supplies. This is offset by another 60,000, though, that we'll see as an increase to our contract in grounds, as we do provide a service to Parks Canada for grounds to take care of their grounds. So there also is in this suggested, within these amounts, suggested increase in how much would go towards fleet services and how much would go towards the value of the asset being contributed towards reserves. So 1% on each of those, and then 0.5% on building values should be going to contracted services and material goods and supplies. So that's factored into there. Just another point to mention in this slide that parking has not been added to the operating budget as of yet. I'm still working on these figures, and it was discussed in a prior council meeting that paid parking will be discussed within this budget cycle. So that has not been included in these figures as of yet. Then you'll also see protective services, an increase of 18,000. And this is an increase due to $5,000 of toxic Roundup. And this is a service that we used to provide in the past, and operations used to take care of it. And we figured it would be best for protective services to take this on. It was presented in 2019 for the 2020 budget. However, it was removed due to COVID. We think it's a valuable thing that we should be continuing to provide for the community. There's $4,000 of reallocation of maintenance wages, $5,000 in services, especially going to the aging fleet that the protective services is dealing with. And we are estimating a little bit of a decrease in business license revenue. And that's about $5,000. And hopefully that is not the case, but again, planning for worst case scenario. So just to touch on reserves and asset management a tiny bit, being that we've brought it up within the slides a few times. In 2017, the asset replacement costs at that time, when we had our final asset management study done, was $269 million. And the average capital budget allocation in 2017 was $2.5 million. And the capital renewal needs going forward is actually $7 million annually. In 2018 and 19, the capital additions actually went above the average capital budget allocations, being at 6.6 million. So we were, and that's mainly because of the amount of work that has been going into the aging infrastructure within the rec facilities. And the average reserve contribution is 1.5 million. So again, just to highlight that this is not much going forward. Now, as Mr. Don had brought up in the request for decision, there's also a portion of the budget that is not tax-based, it's user-based, and that is our utilities. And these are the increases that are being suggested through water, sewer, garbage, and recycling from 2020 into the 2021 year. And I believe that Mr. Greathead is online still to be able to speak to these increases a bit more.
Good morning again, Council. Yes, what we are proposing by increasing our utility rates, we have had the reports in the past, I'll mention the Gordon Molnar, the Pillar Systems recommendation, where he was recommending, $6 million a year, or a little more than $6 million a year per to be put into reserves to fund the replacement and the capital renewal and end of life cycle requirements. Now, many of our valves and utility infrastructure for the water and for the sewer, we do know that most of those, or a good portion of those, are approaching 50 years and up to 70 years of lifespan. Now, typically, their expected lifespan is 25 to 30 years. So we've more than doubled the expected lifespan, and we are lucky in Jasper. Our soil conditions, they're great. It's great soil. It's not a hot soil. We don't have a lot of organics. We don't have a high acidity content in our soil. So it's actually really stretched the lifespan of these piece of infrastructure. But we do need to start looking forward and being able to fund a planned replacement and upgrade of all of our systems. So there's certain areas in town where we would have up to 40 houses that are fed off of a 3-inch line or 4-inch line, and we don't have adequate flow, water flow. And I think a lot of this is because we've been faced with a lot of infill over the last few years. That's really increasing the demand on our utilities. So we are needing to replace the services pretty much from the ground up. Administration has dealt with and talked with our partners, ACO Gas, ACO Pipelines, and ACO Electric, and to have a coordinated approach where we would take off, work into the planning and come up with a method of how we're going to renew all of our infrastructure, upsize it appropriately, looking forward to the future and future-proof everything. And so we would work on lowering the gas lines. Some of those are quite shallowly buried, and that prevents us from doing much work in the maintenance of the alleyways in town. As well, we would be looking at replacing all the sewer, water services, all the deep services, and then needing to do the tie-ins for each property. So kind of a base number is about $2.5 million per block, were we to do the deep services and build everything back in up to and including the roads and the sidewalks as we go forward. So we do have, I think, 37 blocks in town. So we're looking at pretty close to $100 million of infrastructure replacement that we would have to get to over certain years. And I'm not expecting this to be a process that would be complete in the next 5 years or the next 10 years. It probably wouldn't be complete within my lifetime, but I do really feel that we need to start planning for that kind of upgrade and renewal. And so that's where we came up with a number of like $4 million. It's lower than what's been recommended in the past, but it's a good starting point. And that would be able to get us to fund the planned replacement, come up with the proper development plan for all of this infrastructure that we would like to address. So, and that's pretty much all I have to add on that for the utility rates.
I have a question, if I may interject, maybe a couple of questions. I noted that, Ms. Malinchuk, that's okay with you?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, well, it's, and I don't know whether it's going to be Mr. Greathead or yourself to answer this, but looking at the 2019 budget for utilities, it was the amount of taxation that went towards that, operationally in the budget, it was 4.37, almost 4,380,000. And we're projecting a little bit lower by $101,000 for this year. So given what Mr. Greathead was describing and some of those achievements that need to be attained, why would we be going in a negative direction that way? Or have we seen some cost savings to where we don't need to have a higher operational budget line item for utilities?
Sorry, where do you see this decrease? And I can explain to it, but I just where.
So in the net tax envelope for 2019 in our past budget, the 2019 taxation the operational dollars towards for utilities in the net tax envelope was $4,379,893.
Yes.
And that was for 2019. So this year, for 2021, when we're trying to match up the budgets a little bit, we're seeing over $100,000 decrease from. So like we've been comparing 2019 to 2021, and here we're looking at 2020 to 2021.
Right.
So yes, there is some increase to what we operated last year, but having talked about working off the numbers of 2019, we're actually seeing a lower number.
Deputy Mayor, I can speak to this. What the number you see is actually an increase to the amounts that you're seeing on 2019's budget.
So you're saying that that total at the bottom is an additional 4.3 million on top of the old 4.3 million. So we're looking at close to $9 million for utilities?
Yes. That is correct. It is an increase from 2020 to 2021.
So essentially double.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification, and please continue, and I'm sure we're all taking notes here.
No problem.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Yeah, so that is the end of the presentation itself. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to my screens now. And the last screen here is just a discussion on the service level document and a summary. So going forward, again, as Ms. Nadon had spoken to in the RFD, is to get to wherever the direction that we receive from council is, we will have to look at the document that's attached to the agenda to discuss the service levels. As it's presented right now, it is the based off of the 2019 figures. And what I've done to, within the document itself, just so you know, there are areas for notes. So I left some big white space so that the discussion can be held. If more information is needed in certain areas for council, then please let administration know going forward, and we can bring back more information in areas that that council would like to discuss further. And then there's areas for you to make notes going forward in making your decisions. So that's the end of our small presentation today, just a very, very beginning to what administration is looking at, and we will need to move forward on this. Thank you very much for your time.
Deputy Mayor, I have a question. If this is an appropriate time for a couple of questions, I'm not sure whether I should just chime in because I don't think you can see us.
No, sir. Thank you.
Mrs. Malinchuk, could you display again the slide showing the non-discretionary increases? I believe it's the slide which at the top, in the top line, showed minus $75,000, and then there was a list below that.
Sure thing. Just one moment. I'd taken it down as I was going to try to unshare my screen so that Deputy Mayor could see everyone. So I will just bring it back up. This slide?
Yes, that was it. Thank you very much. I just want to delve in a little on a couple of these items. The first was the salary and benefits decrease of $75,000. So if I understand what you are saying there is that relative to 2019, you anticipate $75,000 less in salary and benefits. And I think you said that was attributable to daycare. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So there are increases that you see within, but it's offset by the amount of decrease in salaries from the daycare not being able to have as much staff going into the next year. Yes.
So, right, that was my question. So I understand that's anticipated for 2021 because you are anticipating lower usage of the daycare in 2021. Is that right? I'm sorry, it's kind of a series of questions I have. I need to understand one thing before I can ask the next.
Yes, you're correct in your understanding.
Okay, but my assumption would be, therefore, if we're expecting fewer children in daycare, I understand why that would result in lower salaries, but wouldn't it also result in commensurately lower income?
Yes, it does.
So I'm surprised that it can result in a net decrease in expense net of $75,000.
It's because we are looking at the actual salaries and benefits alone, so comparing them going forward and not looking at the department itself. So if you look at each department individually, you'll see things differently. But if you compare all salaries within all departments, there are some that go up. Obviously, all of them will go up, but it's offset by the decrease of the salaries and benefits in that area. So it's not a look of, it's not looking at each department as a net surplus or deficit. It's looking at salaries and benefits only as an expense, because we're speaking of non-discretionary increases alone.
Okay.
Yes, it's just like if you take, when we break it out in our budget, we have all salaries as labeled as say 110 and our benefits are 130. And if you compare them annually as an entirety, and that's where we're looking at that. And it's just, it had to be noted within the calculations, but you would only see what is affected by in each department if broken apart by department.
Thank you. Could I ask then about the last number, the decrease in revenue forecast in budget amount in a normal year in 2019, I guess, of about $1.3 million in user fees. And some of that may be grants, but I'm surprised that you're anticipating only $120,000 in decreased revenue for 2021. And I would be surprised that you're not anticipating more decrease. And then I guess the second part of my question is, if you're showing a decrease in revenue for culture and recreation, why are we not also seeing a decrease in revenue, which I assume you would anticipate in daycare? Going back to my first question.
Okay. So to explain that one, the daycare is directly correlated to salaries and benefits, also like work out to what they're charging in their user fees. So you see the decrease in their user fees as well. When we're talking about recreation, there's more of an impact of on the tax requisition from the culture and rec area. So it was quite an impact to see, or it hit the budget quite a bit in that $120,000. And yes, this is what we've projected for the fitness and aquatic activity and arena decrease in revenue. And it was noted because of the amount and it being substantial and it actually playing into these numbers.
Right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If I may, I have a question. It's Councillor McGrath.
Fire away.
Ms. Malinchak, why would the $200,000 increase in salaries and benefits be put on the service delivery increase slide and not in the non-discretionary increase slide?
Because these are increases to staffing positions. So we would be looking at, as we bring in every year, when we're adding to a staff, adding to staff levels, we note it separately, and it could be chosen to not go forward.
With that being said, Ms. Melanchuk, what positions is administration hoping to add in the operations department for the $200,000?
So I have notes here on tradesperson, also a top up on power engineer, a top up on trades apprentice, manager top up, and then also, so all of those were in the maintenance department, and then also in roads, salaries and benefits. There's a substantial increase there, and that was also due to noted the new parking space as well. And I think that Mr. Greathead has come online to add to what I've said already.
Yes, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to answer Councillor McGrath's inquiry there, we are looking at bolstering up the position to reduce, or bolstering up our staffing to reduce our reliance on contractors right now. You know, we are looking for a tradesperson, and ideally were we to have either a plumber or a electrician, instrumentation with an electrician with an instrumentation background, you know, with that, we would be able to reduce our contracting by at least as much as the salaries are. It's just that we're at capacity right now, and the increase in salaries would just directly offset what we do contract out right now. So I believe our plumbing and our electrical bills both pretty much equate to a salary each position. And again, we've spoken about the need for health and safety, someone full-time in that role within our organization as a health and safety officer. So those are the positions that we were looking for an increase on in the staffing.
If I may continue, Mr. Greathead, how would that offset, like where would that $200,000 be in the contractual positions that we're currently hiring? And where would we see a decrease in that 200,000 to balance out with the requested 200,000? If we're saying that we wouldn't actually be spending more money per calendar year, we would just be employing this tradesperson, but we're already spending it. So would that be operational money that we're spending contractually that we would see change into more or less just a different line item?
That's correct. Right now, like our contracting out budgets within the department are spread across many different line items. So within the operations, we have the water treatment line, the 42 codes and 41 codes and the sewer codes. So like all of these different line items that we have for all of our different aspects all have a contract labor line item in all of those. To specify and predict what we'd be saving on contracted work, I'm just unsure of what we would of how much we would be able to offset that. As it is right now, we're barely keeping up and meeting needs, and so there's an awful lot of work to do. So we weren't able to really say it would be an in and out transaction at this point.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I know it was mentioned, but I just need more clarification. First of all, is on the reserves to utilities. Two questions. First of all, you mentioned an amount of 6 million. So what is the proposal? 6 million would be ideal, I guess. I'm not sure. We just need more expansion on that. And my second part is a question, something that Ms. Malinchuk will probably have to answer, is how much have we been placing in reserves through the utility levy, the utility fee levy? I know for the longest of time, it was just the fees were based on cost only. When did we start? Or sorry, how much have we added to the utility reserves from the utility fees in the last 3 years? So, and you could research that and come back with the answer later. But I would like to go back to Mr. Greathead's comments about the 6 million. Like, what is he considering? What is he recommending? What is he suggesting that we do? And what's the rate increase going to be for users? Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, to speak to Councillor Janot's question. Right now, we are at this point, we're looking for a goalpost to get to. So that's why we are suggesting that we increase the rates, and the RFD that's in front of you is asking for a target of where we should hit. And then once we have that target number, then we can bring back rate models to see exactly the direction of council and where we should go for the implementation of these. So this is a starting point. This is an ask right now. Get us on the right path is where we're approaching this from.
Does that answer your question, sir?
Well, I guess it does partly answer the question. I guess we're going to have to get more information before we can set that target date, or the target amount, sorry. And I'll wait for that. There's no, it doesn't need to be today, but certainly for next council meeting. Thank you. And same with the amount of money in reserves. It can be next council meeting.
Deputy Mayor, I may answer that at the moment if you would.
Feel free.
Prefer. In the utility section of transfer of payments or transfer to reserves only in 2018, 417,000. 2019, 548. In 2020, 559. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota. Firstly, I want to thank each of the presenters, Ms. Nadon, Ms. Malinchuk, and Mr. Greathead for that presentation, for the RFD and for the slide deck that we just went through. I'm going to assume that at some point that presentation that we have just seen makes it onto our website, and it's not part of the agenda package properly, but it's obviously part of the public discussion now. But because I can't scroll back and forth through it, I may fumble a bit with my questions, but assuming that this does become a public document shortly, I wanted to confirm some of the principles behind it, particularly the terminology. So the non-discretionary increases, with the exception of loss of revenue, which is a little bit separate, but the other ones are in fact increases in fixed costs. So commitments to labor, to positions, to utilities, so the amount we pay for electric power and natural gas, for example. So our fixed costs are going to increase, and that necessarily becomes important as we move forward with the budget. And I'll ask a series of questions and then just ask for confirmation. With respect to those items that appeared on that slide deck as service delivery increases, I interpret that to actually mean increases to maintain services at existing levels, not an increase in service delivery. But if this goes to the public, I think it's important that the public clearly understand what is being discussed. And I'm not entirely sure that all of those pages that have a title, Service Delivery Increases, mean the same thing. And particularly on the utilities, does it mean that we are going to maintain the existing or the 2019 service delivery level, or are we changing that service delivery level to some extent? And even if that is better planning for capital replacement, that might translate to a change in delivery or the level of delivery service. So those are very broad questions that I think the public is entitled to know, and it would certainly help me as I look deeper into the numbers. So if anybody can remember what I said, understand what it was, and answer that, I would be appreciative.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, to speak to the mayor's question there. It is for the utilities. It's a bit of both, if I can answer that, and I don't mean to be wishy-washy. We want to make, like, there's the request that we can maintain the service levels as we were in 2019, but there are further commitments as our infrastructure ages and becomes more taxed, I guess. And so there's also best practices that we should be following that we just aren't able to get to at this point. So we do look for increasing and staffing components, and then we will be able to provide an acceptable level of service. So it is an increase, but it is also just maintaining the minimum standards. It just comes at a higher cost, and there's more stuff that we should be doing. Like as it stands right now, you know, the valve turning and that was a new initiative that took place over the last few years with the purchase of the valve actuating machine, and then dedicating staff to that. Now that to Jasper is a new thing, but that's best practices, and that should have been going on for years and years. So there's still some gaps in our service delivery that the utilities department feels that we need to be addressing and providing. So I don't know if that, I hope that answers or clarifies your question there. It is a hybrid, though. It's the minimum standards, but we need to do better.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota, through to Mr. Greathead. I appreciate that answer. That's certainly satisfactory from my perspective.
But if I can continue on that train of thought, the visible service change or the service delivery to the resident or you know, the overall taxpayer in the community, I think what Mr. Greathead, what you might be alluding to, that it might not be noticeable to the individuals that or the organizations that are funding this portion of the utility. So it's more of enhancing to keep up with what we need to do.
Yes, Deputy Mayor, that's correct. As well as we've mentioned in the past too, that our water meters and stuff, you know, the fixtures and appurtenances that go into our distribution system, the meters wear out over time. So we're getting an under reading on our water meters by 10 to 20%. So that's an instant loss of revenue, but we don't have the manpower to actually get out there and get all that work done. As well as we should be doing meter inspections and making sure that there is, you know, people aren't bypassing water, and that they're actually, you know, being accurately billed, and that's accounted for. We have increased demands on our wastewater treatment plant. We've sunk an awful lot of money into that this last year, just bringing it back up to speed and making some urgent and necessary repairs. So there's a lot we can do. a lot we should do. We're just not there. And a part of our ask too was to, throughout the utility fees would be also to fund training and another officer for the peace officers. So that way, that would help us with our municipal inspections when we need to go in and check on the grease traps, when we need to, do an annual inspection on our water meters and that sort of stuff. So that would give us the credibility and authority to be able to, do a better job. So that's at the root of it, is it's to enhance our service delivery. And again, it's not going to be something that everyone's going to notice. It's not going to be a new building or, something like that. It's just changing our practices and investing into our own utilities system.
Thank you, sir. And I think that's important to understand. And unfortunately, our council meetings aren't extremely entertaining to many people in the community, and to get that communication across to the broader citizenship, I think is going to be a little bit of work in itself, and particularly if we go in the direction that administration's requesting. And I think that we need to develop some better communication on that enhancement, particularly in those areas, so that people understand why we're behind, what's caused us to be behind, and what we need to get a little marginally further ahead. And also with the understanding that, I believe from what's been presented, that some of this is going to go into capital as well, the utilities into the in-ground stuff that people don't see.
And I would just like to, I guess, clear up the point too. Like I'm not coming across saying that our town is doing that we're doing anything wrong, that we're, I've been really, really pleased to work with the group that we have. And we do have an exceptionally high level of care and diligence to our utility system. It's even been recognized by our regulators that we deal with and that. So I don't mean to come across as it's doom and gloom, but I'm trying to make sure that we future-proof our utility system and that we're doing all that we can.
I agree, and I totally understand everything that you've described to us, and I think just communicating that to the broader audiences, I don't think it's going to be a challenge, but I think we have an opportunity to do well by ourselves and operationally by having a good communication piece there. Does anyone else have anything to add to the discussion on utilities at this moment, or anything else that was presented? I have a couple of questions myself, but
Councillor Demota, or Deputy
Yes,
Mayor
please.
Demota.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, that's fine.
Thank you for letting me chime in here. I would just like to go back to Mayor Island's comment around how would this impact service levels, or the definition of what is a continuity of current service levels versus what would be an improvement. And I think when we're talking about investing in our aging infrastructure and transfers to reserves and utilities in particular, what you might be looking at if there aren't those investments is failure of systems. So it's not necessarily improving the service level, but I guess it would fall under maintaining. But there's also a sort of a subcategory there that as items fail, we may not be able to provide those services anymore. And that might be what drives investment in reserves. So yeah, something to consider as part of those service levels discussions. And on the communications front, certainly those changes, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation where council decisions and leadership and movement in that direction would then warrant, additional communication being put out there, explaining to the public that we need to invest more money in our infrastructure when the dollars aren't there is kind of a difficult situation to be in. And there is all kinds of information around asset management and things like that. But to your point, Deputy Mayor, Demota, that information is not necessarily easily digestible by the public, or for people to go out and research that is unlikely, right? So
Exactly, and particularly like, you know, we're looking at from going from within utilities from 4.3 to an $8.6 million funded operation, and that's kind of hard to deliver. So never mind palatable or acceptable by the community, it's just even understanding why it's doubled, and you know, what are people getting for that? And I think that when it comes to the visibility of what's transpiring on the street, we're not going to see as a taxpayer a lot of changes. So there has to be some accountability and some backup to that. And we have it all for the most part. We have the understanding of why, but if you're somebody that's sitting there and all of a sudden looks at our budget and, you know, the alarm bells start going off, then, you know, there's not a lot of clarity in that right now. And I hope to be able to have some way of delivering that to the community, if that ends up being the number.
And I think also, if I may follow up, that Councillor Journeau sort of identified this earlier, that the utilities conversation needs more information and detail around it. And I happen to know a bit more of what's behind that 4 million increase in the water rates that Mr. Greathead is proposing, and certainly that information to come to council in a documented format, like in an RFD, so everyone can review it, and lots more discussions to come on the utilities front as I see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I have Councillor Butler and then Councillor McGrath, and then anybody else that wants to speak. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. This is a request with respect to the actual RFD document, which is in our agenda package. I'd like to say that the background information provided with respect to the proposals that we listened to in the presentation is clear. The table that I'm looking at is very clear. The 2019 tax requisition of $7.9 million, the 2020 tax requisition, the first increment of the proposal from administration, which add $8.4 million, which I take to be administration's advice as to what simply maintaining 2019 levels of service would look like. And then the 9.1 some million dollars being what the administration suggests continuation of services with some additionals to conform to best practices. So that's clear, and it's a good framework for the public and council to see in respect to making the decision that we're asked to make. But I see none of that information with respect to utility rates. This goes back to Councillor Demota's question earlier with, well, what is the $4.3 million increase and how does that fit in? And I would like to ask that this request for decision be updated so that we can see an equivalent rubric to help us understand. We're being asked to look at a substantial increase without seeing the context of what historical, even 1 year ago, information looks like. So I think we need to see a similar figure table with respect to the utility rates proposals. Otherwise, I fear that the public won't understand the context of the decision that we're being asked to make.
I appreciate your eloquence with the English language, because it sounds so much better when you say it than when I do. So thank you for that extra level of clarification. Councillor McGrath. And then Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota. My question is in regards to utilities specifically, and more adding on to what Councillor Butler just suggested for more information. More information is always necessary and appreciated. With the utilities moving from 4.3 to $8.6 million, or the request for utilities to increase by such a dramatic figure and double, I'm curious if, if this is where we need to be and this is best practice for a municipality to run, and this is the way administration sees our community run, there has to be some sort of framework around this on how we get there. You know, can we increase from 4.3 to 8.6 this year, a year where many of us are already struggling? I think that's probably really tricky. But how can we get there? Can we create a policy that gives us direction over the next 5 years to increase our utilities from 4.3 to 8.6, that also gives the next council a tool to use in how we achieve best practices and how we get to where we need to be? I don't have an appetite for changing it this dramatically this year, but I do appreciate and respect and acknowledge the position administration is in, and I want to help us get there. So if we could start carving the way or paving the way through to get to 8.6, I'm definitely in favor of making policies and whatever it is we need to do to get there. But I could not agree to changing our utilities this calendar year from 4.3 to 8.6.
Councillor, thank you, Councillor McGrath. Before I go to Councillor Cherneau, Mr. Greathead, did you want to add anything to that? I thought you were about to speak up.
I agree that, you know, it is has a bit of sticker shock to this amount. It is substantial that we're requesting. But having said that, this isn't just an arbitrary ask. You know, it's something that we've had a lot of the background studies. I mentioned Mr. Molnar's recommendations of the asset management plan. We also had another consultant, Mr. Clark, come in and do some rate-based modeling. And those numbers were actually quite a bit steeper than what administration is proposing at this point. Of course, you know, it will be the will of council. And again, if you give us a target to hit, we can hit that. But as it stands right now, like you know, the recommendations were for a higher amount than we're seeking. But administratively, you know, the team here has you know, decided, okay, this is a big change in philosophy. It's going to obviously cause some concern, some alarm. But that's just where we feel that we need to go, like a small amount, and doing it incrementally. It's possible, it's feasible. At least it's we're still moving the puck forward, and that's, you know, that's a good thing for us. So you know, whatever target that council chooses, we can hit that.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. I appreciate that. I hope that's a good answer for you, Councillor McGrath. And Councillor Cherneau, you wanted to add the conversation? Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Deputy Mayor. One of the things that I didn't hear enough of, if I heard at all, was on user fees. I know administration would like to postpone talking about these until we have set the budget, but I think it's important to bring up the fact that a user fee should be reviewed with certain parameters in mind. So we know that we've been advised that in the areas of daycare and recreation, for example, there's much more staff is needed to clean the items and just to look after the COVID requirements. Therefore, if it costs more to do business, we should be looking at recovering some of those expenses via user fees, and there has not been any mention in that. Clearly, in the area of daycare, I just heard the numbers that you talked about, reduction in staff. Yes, but there's less attendance, so therefore there's a loss of revenue. But I think somewhere along the way, there has to be a factor of calculating increased cost by increasing user fees in both those sectors, the children's center and recreation. Don't need an answer today, but I think that it should be entering into the discussion at a very early date. Thank you.
Mrs. Malinchak and Ms. Nadon. Is that an adequate request, or do you understand what Councillor Chanot is asking?
Sorry, Deputy Mayor Demota through to.
It's just a title. You could still call me Councillor, or you could just call me Rico, but I understand the level of professionalism we need here. So
I'm changing titles all the time. Yes, it would require a study to see where we're at when it comes down to culture and recreation user fees. Now, I know that they've been done in the past, and we were sitting on the higher end initially, so we adjusted to make sure that we weren't overcharging for the service that was being used. It would take some time. We can look to see if that can be done again. When it comes down to daycare, I know that there's also an adjustment to be absorbed by the community when it comes down to the removal of the ELCC grant, giving the $25 a day for daycare. So there will be some big adjustments there for parents already, in that they will be paying more, given that that grant is not available anymore. So, and that has always been in the manager as well as the director's mind going forward, and you know, making sure that it is that it's fine for the users. The amount is going to be fine for the users going ahead. So, but yes, I understand where the question comes from, and we can see if we can apply some staff to do some research on what other communities are charging at the moment and whether or not we're still comparable within to what other communities offer. And we might be a little bit different in relation to population and what we offer as a facility, given that we have, you know, the fitness and aquatic center attached, and some places have, you know, their fitness center separate or don't have a fitness center. There's a bunch of variables in there, but we will do our best to look at what is out there and make sure that we're presenting some information going forward.
Councillor Junot, you're okay with that?
I think, no, I do have a follow-up. I thought Ms. Nadon was going to answer at this as well.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor Demota through to Councillor Junot, if I might add, my thought on this is that through the service levels discussion is where those types of concerns should be raised. So if we get direction from council that a specific service area needs to be looked at, and the revenue part of it would be a valid conversation to have around those services and how they are funded, I think is very much the type of conversation we're looking forward to in using the service levels document. And I would suggest also supporting what Mrs. Malinchak just said, that our user fees in daycare and culture and rec specifically are already high, is might be an overstatement, but I think we're looking at something like $65 a day to put a child in daycare currently. And I think for families, that's a pretty good amount compared to, we just went from $25 to $65, and how much can a drop in fee for using the gym, for example, you know, how high can that go before usership starts to drop down is another consideration. But again, I would suggest that through the service levels discussion and how services are funded is where this discussion belongs.
Thank you for that.
Please.
Yeah, I'll allow you to follow up. And then I think Councillor Keller-Rampy had her hand up, and then Mayor Ireland.
Thank you very much. I see both of those answers as being rather defensive, and that's exactly what I don't want to see. And I don't want to see us base our rates on comparing to other communities, especially not in daycare, because there's only one other community that runs a public daycare. If you're going to compare daycares, go to the private sector and you'll really see what the cost is. So I think that what I'm trying to suggest here is that a review of the fees should be at the forefront, not kept at the end of the project when we look at our dollars and cents cost. We know there's extra costs in recreation and daycare because of COVID. We have to adjust the user fees to reflect that. Pure and simple. Thank you.
If I might follow up, Councillor Journeau, I think administration is willing to follow any direction council may set and would like to refute the reference to a defensive position. It is our professional advice, and that's how we see it. And you have your views and we have ours, but ultimately council makes those decisions and we're happy to implement them. So by no means are we suggesting that this conversation should not happen. And if it's the will of council to raise the fees, we shall. And I would suggest that the service levels discussion is not necessarily pushing the issue down the road, as in those discussions need to start happening in a prompt manner. So I anticipate in the next few weeks we'll be having those, would be my expectation. But respectfully, thank you for expressing that. And I just felt the need to reiterate our spirit of collaboration going through this. And these are not going to be easy discussions. And if we appear as defensive, that is not our intent. I can promise that. And I think we have to extend the same courtesy to council, as in it is your right and your duty to ask those questions, and our job to answer them to the best of our abilities. So to more fruitful discussions in the future.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you for
Councillor
that.
Journeau, I'd like to move to Councillor Keller-Rempe. Are you finished with your thought there?
I just have a comment. The process that's going on to at this point has been very good. And I really appreciate the dialogue, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to express myself as a councillor in the direction that I think that should be stated. I'm only one of 7 councillors, however, but I think this is the discussion. This is a committee level, and that's what the discussion should be about. Thank you.
I agree, and I appreciate the collaboration and understanding on both sides there. So I have Councillor Keller-Rempe, then Mayor Ireland, and then Councillor McGrath in that order. And then I'll try to keep track of anyone else's hands going up. So thank you for your patience. Councillor, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota, through Deputy Mayor Demota to Mr. Greathead. I just want to clarify something, Mr. Greathead. When we double for the 4.3 to the 8 million in the for utilities, will that cover all the positions that you're asking for? Like, is that going to be covered by the utility costs, or will some of those positions be covered by the tax base?
The intent is to, the utility rate increase would be just to start feeding the bank and build up our reserves. So the operating increases in staff that we have requested, that's separate and apart.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead, for clarifying that.
Okay. Mayor Ireland, I have you up next, but pretty soon I usually like to take a break an hour and a half in, and when I see Councillor Journeau getting up for a personal break, that's usually like the first indication that we should all probably take a personal break. So I don't want to cut anybody off, but I feel that these discussions are going to continue, and I know that you've had your hand up for a while, so I'd like to go ahead with that indication to the rest of council that I'm looking at taking a bit of a break here. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. And to you, through to, I suppose, council generally, but Mr. Greathead, I suppose in particular, I appreciate that council has yet to make a decision on rates and the amount of revenue that might be generated through utilities. But regardless of that, I really do appreciate the suggestion in the RFD that we as council consider independently a change to the utility fee structure. It is a question of equity, and I agree with Councillor Butler's opening comments that we may have to discuss what is equitable and what is not. But I think there's a real opportunity to set ourselves a new path at this time. And regardless of how long it takes us to get to the end of that path, I think this is an opportune time to look at changing utility fee structures to potentially incorporate a fixed charge and a consumption charge. Because it seems to me that it is beyond question that there is a benefit to everyone to have, for example, water service. Whether you use much or not, there is a direct benefit. And it might be more appropriate and more beneficial to the person with the $700 or $7.5 million commercial property as compared to a $750,000 residential property when the hydrant is needed. So a fixed charge based on the size of the pipe that services your property might be appropriate, combined with a consumption charge, so that the user can control it. But I think it is way past time that we started looking at those particular issues. So again, Councillor Butler requested more detail about the utility rates so that we can have something similar to what we have on the tax side. And I agree with that. But I also think that as part of that, I would benefit tremendously by a description of how that might work, how we might better allocate those costs. And even if we leave the cost exactly the same, how we more fairly and equitably distribute that cost among our users. And then over time, we can start down a proper path to start building up our reserves. But I think this is a perfect time to get ourselves on a new path with respect to how we allocate costs for utilities. And I thank you for bringing that up. And I'm hoping that we see more of that combined with the information that we need to better understand why the fee increases are proposed.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I really like the insight and the idea behind that direction. Mr. Greathead, would you like to add to that?
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. And part of the process that we've been going on within the Utilities and Operations Department, I gotta say kudos and thank you to our utility manager, Mr. Michaud. We've been delving into this and looking at different models, different scenarios, and checking different communities throughout, not just Alberta, but throughout Canada, and looking for the proper methodology. So when the mayor was mentioning, a fixed charge for your the pipe that's feeding your property, that's a good part and one of the stepping stones for the consistency across Canada of basing your rate models. So it's usually dependent on the size of the service going in. So if you need a 2-inch meter as opposed to a 5/8 of an inch meter where you use for your house, that's a different rate and it works as a different multiplier. Also, with our rates, we do not have an account fee or a user fee off the hop, and we should be having that as a direct cost because there are some direct positions that are solely in our organization to handle the billing and the management of the utility. So there's a blend of different options, and we will be able to have something to you for next meeting. Of different scenarios and different types of rate models that we can go to if that will help the process go forward.
So our utility bills might look more like those regulated services bills that we get with rate riders and transmission fees and things like that can be sometimes confusing, but those are essentially what those are attributed to. Right?
I believe that's where we will end up there, Mr. Deputy Mayor. That's how the rest of the country, North America, rate modeling is going. And we do have hard costs. We do have staff that are dedicated. So those costs should be coming off that they should be attributed. So I would imagine that our utility bills will look significantly different in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor McGrath, we'll wrap it up with this line of questioning. No rush. And then we'll take a little bit of a break after, but by no means do I want to rush you through this. So feel free to go ahead with what you wanted to ask.
Oh, okay. So speak now, then go on a break. Okay, perfect. My question is for Ms. Malinchak. And in regards to the most funding that we've announced to the residents of our community and the funding that was provided to us by both federal and provincial levels of government, understanding that Jasper has uniquely been devastated by COVID-19. What would we see as far as savings and reduction of a request from our taxpayers, given that we have received so much assistance, specifically with the increases operating in regards to cleaning and staffing and salaries, along with the loss of revenues that we've seen in many departments? Where can we expect to see these offsets applied to the budget process, and when can that be seen a little bit more clearly as to how that will impact us moving into the 2021 budget?
Deputy Mayor, through to Councillor McGrath. Unfortunately, I do not have the answer for you as of yet. We're still working on calculating those numbers, and it will take us some time, being that we don't even know where we're sitting for year end. So they are being calculated and watched, and we will have updates coming forward, but I don't have anything for you at the moment. Unfortunately, I apologize for that. It is a lot of work, and it's going to be, yeah, it's quite the task to put together. So as soon as we have the information, we will get it to council for sure.
Thank you, Ms. Malinchuk and Councillor McGrath, for addressing that question. I have more along those lines, and I'll do that after the break. But one thing I did want to add, like, if there's an opportunity, I don't know what the availability in the community is to you know, contract some assistance in that area, Ms. Malinchuk, to help us probe and analyze what part of that funding that we can access through that, because and if that ends up being a piece of what we you know, what's our ask in those grants, and we have to attribute that extra cost to process all that, then that is part of a resumption that we're going to have to do because of, you know, our recovery, and I believe that would be part of the process myself. So if you need assistance in that area, I mean, we should probably look at that if we can get the government to pay for that, because it's going to save the community a lot more money if we can find out where we can attribute that funding, because I have the fear that we won't come up with enough resumption for COVID to help offset some of the costs going forward that are justifiable for 2021, because we're looking at some pretty substantial numbers here, and I'd feel remiss if we weren't able to decrease some of that with some of the funding that's provided or could be available.
Thank you for that suggestion. Going forward, we have started the work, and I don't see the need at the moment. However, it is a good suggestion. Thanks. We hopefully will have some more information, as I alluded to in another meeting as well, that I need to speak to a grant advisor, and I still haven't been able to touch base with one. Once I hear more from the grant advisor too, then I'll have more information for council as well. But at this point, we are plugging along and working on it. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So I appreciate all that. Right now it's 11:23. If I call us back at 11:33, would that be good? 10 minutes for everyone, and we'll come back then. Thank you. 11:33. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Usually when I switch off of my earbuds, I take the microphone. Okay, I hope we have everyone back here. Ms. Malinchuk, Ms. Nadal, are you back? I can't see you.
I'm here, thanks.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay, moving forward, we finished off with a question from Councillor McGrath. Does anyone else have any other questions to discuss or add to the budget? process. All right. You know, I do want to talk to council and, you know, maybe in one of our spitballing sessions, not necessarily today, to discuss equity in business licensing. You know, I know that we have this standard $165, and that's been the standard since I believe I started on council some 13 years ago, and maybe it was a bit lower, but I remember years back even paying business licenses for businesses or obtaining one for my own. That always seemed to be the ballpark of where they sat. And you know, sometimes if you're looking at a home-based business versus like a you know, a multi-million-dollar business, the whole thought behind that number back from when I started was to recoup the administrative aspect of just providing business licenses. But there's a lot more to business licenses than just someone taking in checks or payment, and you know, the distribution of the paper and all that stuff, because you know, we're required to have fire inspections, and bylaw definitely doing their work in maintaining standards in the community, and people addressing, you know, our bylaws take some of that work. And I think that, you know, $165 across the board doesn't really fulfill the requirement of what we're delivering in through that process. So definitely a conversation to have. And if we're looking towards you know, some cost recovery in areas, that could be one of the areas to address. I'm not sure when you want to do that, or if that's even right for this budget process. But if we're talking about areas of equity and potential alternate revenue, that could be a source. Any thoughts? Councillor Butler?
Well, it's something, thank you for bringing that up. It's questionable, I suppose. We can decide whether, as you say, it's part of this budget conversation, but it has occurred to me on a number of occasions that I don't believe as an organization we're necessarily always paying as much attention as we should to continuity of user fees and income. The business licensing bylaw was passed in 2008 with a business license fee of $165, which, as you said, I understood to be some idea of a cost recovery amount. By today's date, that $165 is only worth $135. We've experienced, by doing nothing, by not making any changes, we've experienced a 30% drop or so in, sorry, that's 18%, excuse me. We've experienced about an 18% drop in real income from that department alone. And I think we have to do better about keeping on top of the income side of our books and making sure that our various sources of income are where they ought to be. So it is an important discussion, one that we should be having soon. The business license fee is embedded within the business license bylaw, which strikes me as being inefficient because we have to actually amend the entire bylaw in order to change that fee, which doesn't strike me as very efficient.
No, and I agree with you. And before I, Councillor or Mr. Greathead, I'll get to you in a moment. I fully agree, and I appreciate those observations. And we should look at a system maybe at addressing CPI in some instances, or once we come up with a more fair system, still address the increases, because you're right. Like if that was 2008, and we look at the costs that have, particularly our fixed costs for certain things that have incrementally increased, and we're still 12 years later still sitting at a similar number, it doesn't make sense to me. So we need to address that, and with some type of annual renewal in assessing a fee. Mr. Greathead, sorry, thank you for your patience.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, to speak to Mr. Butler's concern, there's many municipalities have a separate fees and charges bylaw. So that way, when we do have to adjust a rate, we just address it through the fees and charges bylaw. And we don't actually have to open up each individual bylaw and go through it separately. So that's something we can work towards and bring that back to council in short order. I don't believe I can get it in for next week, but it's something we can work towards for sure. There's other municipalities, like I said, we've researched. Banff is actually one of the ones that I am a real fan of. It just covers everything, and then it can be modified as needed and amended when it's appropriate. So that's something, if that's the will of council, we can bring that back.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead, and it's good to have that administrative experience, and I'm grateful that we have that. And going to a reduction in last year's tax requisition to $7 million has really helped us face some of those issues that have come to surface, particularly where we're already running lean, and some other areas where we could be more profitable, or at least in the area of cost recovery in some areas. But I do think that we should start addressing putting some money towards some type of future funding, whether it's in reserves or another type of area where we're recouping for future necessities in our community. And again, I don't think $165 across the board is going to really help that, because different areas of and different businesses require different amounts of work. So I think maybe not this year rehauling the system, but definitely looking at a fee structure bylaw as opposed to having to open everything up. Even though if we do that, we'll still have to go and open it up to adjust the making room for the new bylaw. Having said that, this question would probably be a little bit more directed towards Ms. Malinchuk in the area of finance. So the fact that we did go to a $7 million requisition for 2020, there was the intent that just under or around $800,000 of that was going to reserves. And I doubt that we're going to see any type of area where we would be running a surplus in the 2020 budget. But do you have any indication where we're at with our expenditures with just a little over 2 months to go, and how much we may be looking at or have tapped into that intended reserve money in the requisition? Is my request for information clear?
Yes. So that is part of the collection of information that we're working on for the MOST grant, because it will be applicable to that grant funding. So that is being all collected and put together so that it's part and parcel of all the information coming to council. So at the moment, I don't have the exact figures, but it will be coming.
Well, and that's good. And if there is going to be an opportunity for surplus, and the community understands it with that government funding, we either put that towards our revenue for next year if possible, or we transfer that to reserves for future use. I just want to make sure that we're going to be addressing that appropriately, and that the public understands that we do have $3.3 million potentially available to us, and hopefully that'll work towards some savings in the future. But if it doesn't, we will need to communicate where it could be going if we do have access to all of it.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, that concludes my line of questioning and what I wanted to address. Mr. Mayor and Councillor Journeau after.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor DeBoda. I'm just not sure where we are on the agenda, but I wanted to make one comment about agenda item 7.1, if I may, if we haven't already moved on.
I don't think we've concluded.
Okay. It's a very procedurally based question, and I apologize for that. And it's something that should have dawned on me much earlier, but it just did. We are considering a request for decision with a hope that we get to that decision next week. My concern is that I think this ought to be a request for direction, not decision, because once we make a decision, we want to be flexible. We're trying to set targets, but not necessarily firm. And so I fully appreciate administration's desire to have some direction so they can start preparing a budget and the utility details. But I don't know what that looks like when we get to the end of the discussion next week. Do we pass a resolution? And then if we have to change the target somewhere down the road, we want to leave ourselves that ability, I am certain. So I just throw it out there for discussion again next week. Do we want to actually provide staff with a decision, or do we want to provide them with direction? And they certainly deserve the direction as clearly as we can establish it. But I'm not really comfortable saying that that is a decision.
And I agree, Mayor Ireland, in the sense that, we have as much information as possible at this moment, aside from what's been requested on the utility side, but there's still the unknown of that funding that came to us a little bit late. And it's not too late in the sense that we haven't passed the budget yet, but there might be some great opportunities there for the community as a whole. And having those unknowns at this point, I don't want to put more work and crunch time into admin, but if we need to wade through this process, with a little bit more elbow room, so to speak, then I like to address your concern, and I think that's appropriate. Councillor Jeannot, your mic is off. Sorry, you're done. Your question was answered through that.
I just wanted to raise your attention that Mayor Ireland wanted to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you waved your arms because I was taking notes there and I saw the flash on the screen. So, all right. And I'm looking at my other screen. No one else. Ms. Nadon, your mic is off, and that is an indication that you might want to say something.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota. We may have found a system where if staff without cameras unmute themselves, the chair can see that, and that might be a way to get acknowledged. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that to my attention.
I can't believe we didn't think of it earlier, but going back to Mayor Ireland's question or comment around a request for direction versus a request for decision at this stage. From a procedural standpoint, I think your assessment is right. A direction would be sufficient to guide the work and to get the process started. We did frame it as a request for decision with using the word target as in it's likely to change, but I understand how that might be uncomfortable for council, or to set that direction and then at a later time adjust it. So what I could see happening is council sets a target by motion, and then as we progress through the service levels discussion, there's compelling arguments on one side or another to change that number up or down, and you require that flexibility in order to complete your decision-making process, and that's completely understandable. I think maybe that's something council wants to consider for themselves, is the challenge or the difficulty around landing on that target amount. And without a vote, gaining consensus on what that amount is might become a challenge, or maybe not. Maybe there'll be a number put out there and that will get strong consensus, and we can move on a direction base and not a decision base. And that, I think either option would work for administration. It would give us more certainty, I was going to say, which again, through the process might change, but yeah, it could go either way. And I'm sensitive to how that positions council in the future.
Well, thank you for that. And, you know, when you said that, when you were talking about a particular number, I looked over at Councillor Butler, and the way he's situated on his screen, there's room for a thought bubble there. And I thought I saw one transpiring with a number generating. It wasn't entirely clear, but it looked like there was a number generating in that thought bubble. And then I saw his microphone come off. So the hand went up, Councillor Butler. Sorry for putting you on the spot. I'm just adding a little levity to the conversation.
If you could look in the thought bubble, you would see a series of rusty grinding wheels in need of not turning very smoothly. I think that I think that what we're looking at is a decision to direct administration to prepare a draft budget based on tax allocation. And everyone, us, the public and administration, do have to realize that the final decision isn't made until we pass the budget. Ms. Nadon mentioned quite appropriately that if we pick a number, let's say no, I don't even want to mention a number, but whatever number we pick, there may then be further direction with respect to some changes to service levels to affect that budget. And it's, of course, at that point that for some people, it's possible that the number we chose may become unpalatable and need to change. But I would like to see us, in the sense of making a decision, I would like to see us do it through a vote, because otherwise I'd be very concerned that we would come back and then discover that the number we thought we agreed on, we didn't really agree on, and then the budget fails at the 11th hour. And again, as I mentioned several times, we would then potentially have put administration to a lot of work only to have it come back. So my suggestion is that it would be a decision made through a motion and therefore a vote, but it would only be to direct to prepare a draft budget with that target number. And therefore, I think the understanding is there that it could still change before the final budget is approved. And I'm wondering, actually, Mayor Ireland, if you concur that that's the approach we should be looking at.
I think that would be fine. I'm just looking at the wording now, but I think, I mean, regardless of what the number might be, I think a motion that says council directs administration to prepare a budget for consideration with this number in it would be the appropriate form of motion. So it's clearly a direction, not a decision. I mean, yeah. As you say, we should decide a direction.
Right.
But I think it's all in the wording of the motion itself.
Of the motion, I agree, and that's where my thinking has been. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that consideration. And my fear through this process, or maybe one thing that I've been struggling with, is the lack of availability to meet. Whether we're doing it virtually or in person is irrelevant, but we have some major decisions, and if we're only meeting once a week to discuss some of these, I think that we might be failing ourselves, and that's just my own personal opinion. But I know some of us don't like to meet as frequent, and some of us wish, like myself, that we could meet a little bit more to discuss this. But I think just going from week to week, we're going to maybe put ourselves in a similar situation that we were at in the springtime when we had to go and look at our $7 million tax requisition. And I'd like to have a little bit more in-depth conversation per department, like I was requesting last time, as opposed to coming up with a number. And I appreciate where we're going next week to come up with a number, but I don't want that like what was discussed. Like, our intention isn't for that to be a hard number. It's going to be a request for direction. But rather than settling on a number, I'd rather look at where we could have some flexibility in each department and first, and then that'll attribute to a number at the end. we didn't have a lot of time to do that in the springtime, or didn't give ourselves a lot of time. So I think that having a little bit more time, or giving us more time to go through what each department could look like, and then what that final number will end up being, regardless of what we decide next week, is I think the most appropriate way to get to a final number. Any debate about that?
Deputy Mayor Demota, if I may,
yeah, sorry, you're on the other screen. I have to scroll over. Thank you.
No problem. And I do not wish to enter debate, but I do have some thoughts on your proposal, or how procedurally this could unfold, and also following Mayor Ireland's proposed motion for how to word getting to a number next week. I think what administration would like to stress at this point is that whatever the final number, whatever the target number ends up being, and how we get to it is ultimately very much a council decision. So staff is available and open to discussion and providing the information required to support council in making those decisions. And what we've proposed so far is the service levels document that's attached to today's request for decision. And councillors sitting with that document and looking at it and discussing it and narrowing down on which service areas changes are going to be implemented is what we're looking for. And like I said, we're happy to provide the support in making it happen, but it is not like Mrs. Malinchak is going to develop an operating budget by herself once that target number has been set. Those decisions need to come from council on service levels. And to your point, whether you would want to have those service levels discussions first and then land on a number is an amenable process. Like, that could work. But looking at timelines and looking at targets going forward, what's the best setup to foster that decision making and that information gathering and ultimately an approval of the budget is flexible, but is also becoming quite timely and urgent, I would suggest.
Well, goalposts and finish lines to me are two different things. And I would probably relate this to being an outdoor sport. And if we are aiming for a goalpost, it's pretty windy outside and we don't know where that ball's going to go. So, but if we're aiming towards something, I think that, you know, if we come up with some sort of reasonable target, and then make adjustments going along the way. I don't want to set a number and then everybody gets transfixed on that and make some hard decisions based on realities that are completely or somewhat unknown in areas. And I think that we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we're not analyzing, you know, our service levels department by department. So I'm just throwing this out to the rest of council. If there's no desire to, or you think that we have enough time to go through all this meeting from week to week with you know, the future presentation to the public, then I'm not going to demand to put extra time on this if the rest of you think that what we have is adequate. I think that we're in a little bit of a crunch. No matter how early we started this with the information that we have now, I'm finding it difficult to maybe look at, you know, 3 weeks from now with the amount of meeting time that we have set aside for this currently will not suffice, but that's just me. Anyone else? Okay. Councilor McGrath.
Thank you. In relation to Mayor Ireland and Councillor Butler's suggestion of moving this forward next week for a request for direction, I'd just like to, in committee of the whole format, express my comfort level with a figure somewhat close to the 2021 figure 1, which is 2019 plus non-discretionary. You know, if that non-discretionary amount is not budgeable, then I would like to try to decrease that some way to bring it around the $8 million mark for requesting administration bring it back for a further consideration, I would like to express my level of discomfort with the 2021 figure 2 amount of 9,123,000. That's something that I simply could not agree to, a 30% tax increase. But just so council is aware, and so we can spend some time this week considering it, and so administration has some inkling or understanding of where some of us sit, I would express myself around the 8 million, 8 and a bit. If we had to go to 8.4, somehow could we borrow that 0.4? Could we find that $400,000 elsewhere to not put it on the shoulders of the taxpayers and to soften the blow this 2021 year?
Are you speaking, Rico?
Thank you. Apologize for that. I don't see any other microphones unmuted. So I'm not sure if, Councillor, if there was anything to add to that, but I appreciate your angle. And I remember during our debates with the 2020 budget that I hate to put you on the spot, Councillor Butler, but I really liked your idea about, you know, what our future might look like and phasing in something over 2 years, as opposed to making, which we knew with our cuts to the $7 million that we were going to look at substantial increases over the next little while. And I believe that you said at one point that you would be more open to discussing a phase in towards getting towards a higher goal. So I respect what Councillor McGrath was saying. And I think that looking at maybe the 2021 budget and then potentially 2022 to get to something closer to what administration feels that they could deliver as far as services go with their asks, as opposed to jumping straight into it and into the 2021 budget. I am delighted to see that Councillor Wilson has his hand up, and I believe Councillor Jeannot has removed his mute button as well. So I'll start with Councillor Wilson and then go to Councillor Jeannot. But I do, because I did direct my line of questioning towards Councillor Butler, if you have something that you wanted to say towards that, or just wait for the other two. Okay, I'll go with Councillor Wilson. Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
My question may have been answered in meetings past, as I've missed a few, but it's really a question to Mrs. Malinchak about 2020 taxes and the ability to pay, and where we were at with receivable, like tax receivables there. Were we able to, you know, what percentage of people weren't able to pay taxes, or what percentage are still unpaid? Is there something that, you know, a bit of a baseline we can kind of look at there?
Deputy Mayor, through to Councillor Wilson. I presented a report back some time ago. I can generate another report to bring back to council for next week's regular meeting, if that should be a desire of council. It takes a little bit of work and analyzing to put the numbers together, so it's not something that I can just give you right now.
Okay, yeah, I think that the last report that I saw was prior to taxes being due, I think. Was there anything after that?
Yes, I believe that I would have to look back on the date of the report that I submitted and get back to you on that as well. Sorry.
Okay.
I think we had an early September update, and numbers look quite similar to what they were in the previous tax year,
Right.
as far as collection goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I'm asking is, I want to, you know, it's been a very difficult year for many businesses, and I wanted to see what the ability to pay was, and if there were businesses struggling. Of course they were, but I'm assuming that they were able to pay taxes for the most part. I know that we're going to be running into another very similar year. Although I don't want to hobble our community or a municipality. I think we have to look further into the future. We have obligations for that look way past this year's budget, and I think that we're going to have to ask for a pretty hefty increase here this year. And I know it's going to be pretty sour for a lot of people, but we had a break last year. We can't keep operating at these lower levels, and I do support Councillor McGrath's support behind the 2021 figure one, although I think we might have to go even further than that, because I don't want to be not putting money away for future generations. And I think that by going with the 2021 figure one, we do limit ourselves to of what's actually going away for those for the costs that are coming at us with infrastructure failures, etc. So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah, well, and I agree with a lot of that sentiment, and that's why I was posing that question, the phase-in type of scenario. Councillor Jeannot, I had you up next, and then Councillor Butler. No, you're up. Okay, so go ahead, Councillor Butler. You're up. Thank you.
I haven't brought up or mentioned or put forward any views on the numbers that we're looking at, because I assumed we would be talking about that next week when we actually probably have a motion to look at. But I do want to address the question of percentages, and this follows up on Councillor McGrath's comment. I'm very concerned when we begin to frame this conversation as a percentage increase in taxes. The 2020 tax requisition was a one-off, one-time measure that we felt was necessary. We also supplemented that 2020 tax requisition of $7 million with about $430,000, or up to $430,000 in additional requisitions to reopen facilities. So while it's true that figure two, the 9.1 meeting, or $9.1 million number, could be seen as a 30% tax increase over 2020. It's only a 14% tax increase over 2019. So I think it's fair to talk about percentages in terms of a percentage increase over a notionally normal year. But to frame the 2021 tax requisition, whatever that may turn out to be, as a percentage increase over 2020 is obscuring a really important part of the story, which was that really was an absolute one-off situation, and we have to realize that. So the figure two, the $9.1 million, is a 14% approximately tax increase over 2019. Figure one is, I think, about 5.6% tax increase over 2019. And I think that is maybe a more helpful look at percentages rather than weighing against 2020. I hope that no one thinks that the 2020 tax requisition is in some sense the new normal against which future years will be weighed. We just can't afford to Councillor Wilson's point, we just can't afford to think that way.
Yeah, and I fully agree. And this is where, the not having all the answers yet on that most funding or the ICIP, particularly the most funding, because operationally, we peak in the summer months, and that's where we have the majority of staff and all. Yeah, I've got you, Councillor Keller-Rampe. And that's where we tend to peak. And, you know, regarding Councillor Wilson's thought on moving forward and, you know, maybe having a similar year as next year, you know, we've learned a lot from what we went through this year, and to peak in the summertime with getting everything up to full bloom, so to speak, and operationally adequate to resume services and learn from what we learned in 2020, it's going to take us a little bit of money to get there. And if we can allocate some of that funding that the government's giving us to, you know, get up to speed and use some of that to help offset the costs of moving forward for 2021. And, you know, like Ms. Malinchuk had stated, hopefully there's an extension on that end of March date, because unfortunately for us, you know, we're going to be looking at some hikes operationally that go beyond March. And I'm hoping that we can have some tax reliefs through that 3.3 million that, you know, is given to us or potentially given to us, because we're not guaranteed that money unless we can prove that we can justify our increases or adaptation to COVID to address those things. But a lot of that money is because we're a resort municipality and we're obligated almost to provide a higher level of service. So we need to find a way to show that. And if we need to kind of, what do they call it in contracts, like front load, if we need to front load some of those expenses to get it before March so we can distribute them throughout the summertime, then maybe that's something we could look at if the availability is there. Because my concern is it gets cut off in March and we'll only be able to recoup $1 million, and that's not going to really help the community out at all, particularly when there's 3 times that much on the table. So I think that we have a lot of work to do in that area, and I don't want to put the whole weight on administration, but I'd certainly like to contribute a little bit more of my own time to work on that. So I'm just throwing that out there. Any thoughts? We're still on 7.1, the agenda. Oh, Councillor Keller-Rampe, I'm sorry, I had you written down here. I apologize, I didn't address you. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So with all of these discussions, my understanding is that admin would like us to give them some clear direction. I like where Councillor McGrath's going to figure 1. How about we tell admin, this is the direction we're going in or we're looking in. We're going to have to discuss this. We're going to hear from community groups. We're going to get more information back from Mrs. Malinchuk on where the $3.6 million or 3.5 that we got from the government, what we can do with that, where the expenses are. She'll probably know more where they are towards the end of November, even for the first 10 months. We'll know more about what type of money we got back from our land rent. So there's a lot of variables here, but from what I'm listening to the conversations today and listening to admin is they're looking for some direction in order to run us back a budget. So for me, I agree with Councillor McGrath and Councillor Wilson. If we get started with figure 1, it may go up, it may go down. We won't make that decision till the very end, but at least administration knows what to come back with and where we can move forward. In order even to bring it to the public, we will need more discussion, but they can't get started on their work till we give them clear direction. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to be here next Tuesday. I'm out of town next week. So that's kind of where I'm going. And I like the idea of going to figure 1, gives them clear direction, and then they can come back. And as we said, we're going to debate this budget. We're going to debate user fees. We're going to debate increases, reserves, where we saved this year, where we didn't save this year. But that's all ahead of us. But in order for them to get their job done, we got to be fair to them too. It's just my input.
Thank you. Who had their hand up next? Was it Councillor McGrath? Nope. All right. Well, I appreciate that. And I don't know where I sit as far as generating numbers go, but I had a notion in my head that leaving here today that I'd be looking at option 1 plus something, and whether that is splitting what we need to get to in 2022 or 2023. I don't think that we're going to be coming out of this pandemic too quickly, and I think that staging a way out might be the right way to do it. So I'm okay with having that as a starting number, but I think it might be selling ourselves short. And I would like to aim a little higher, with a sense that if we can attribute some of that external funding towards getting our adequate services up to par, and not have the taxpayer foot the front of that bill, or the majority of it, that increase at least anyway, then I'd be more open to more conversation. Right now, I think option 1 is might be selling ourselves a bit short, but I'm willing to start there. I have to spend more time on it, but I appreciate the conversation. All right. Anything else on this agenda item?
Deputy
All right. So,
Mayor Demoda,
please do. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you for your indulgence. I think we've framed the conversation quite well for council to consider next week, and to Councillor Kelleher MP's point, to set a figure that we can work together towards reaching. And I think I've been pushing forward quite a bit that the service levels document is where it's at. That is, if there is a significant change in the proposed figure 1. I would suggest that the 2021 figure 1 at 8.4 million currently does represent the 2019 service levels plus our fixed costs. So if that was the figure that went forward and that was supported, there would be no changes required to the service levels, right? And I also appreciate Councillor McGrath's point around a figure that would be more around 8 million. And if somehow we could find 400,000 in grants or external funding or user fees, or however we get to that number. Similarly, if our total number lands at 8.4, there are no service levels adjustments required. Having that said, council might want to adjust service levels in certain areas anyway. But it's when you start to look at a number that is significantly less than that 2021 figure 1 is where navigating the service levels and adjusting them becomes quite the task. So the amount of work ahead varies greatly depending on that number that council lands on. So anyway, I think this is a good perspective to everyone to think about until next week. And just on administration's behalf, I would like to say that the importance of the most funding and how it may impact our income is not lost on us. We, as Mrs. Malinchak has explained, there's a lot of work that goes behind figuring out which expenses can qualify or which cannot. But certainly over the course of the following week, while we prepare our reports here, trying to get a bit more clarity in terms of how that might impact 2021 is something that I recognize would be beneficial to council. So we'll do what we can to get that information. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Productive discussion.
Okay, I just for one thing, operationally, when it comes to having virtual meetings, maybe you can address this, Ms. Nadeau. Is there an opportunity, or does Zoom provide the availability to expand the amount of people available on the screen? Like, we have 9 currently from screen to screen. Is there a way to increase that to 12 so that we might have a little bit more of a fluid flow here? I don't think that making our individual screens will impede us too much. So we can go from 9 to 12. I think that would help the fluidity of conducting these meetings a little better and being able to observe more people on the screen.
I've been giving this some thought because it was causing some challenges for administrators, namely to get recognized by the chair. And I think what you're seeing depends on your device. So I'm on a
Okay.
desktop right now and I see all the boxes for everyone who's a panelist. So,
Okay.
so Zoom does do it. It's your devices might be the
Okay.
how that works, but also I have another trick up my sleeve that I have to confirm before I make any promises on how that might work, but on how we could potentially facilitate the chair's job in terms of seeing hands up. Like Zoom has a function to raise hands. We just can't seem to figure out how to use it in this format, but I think there might be a way. So
Okay.
more to come.
Right, because I like, oh yeah, I could do that, but you don't see that individually on my screen, right? Like you can't see my hands up. But then when in another process, when we do have like give a thumbs up, it'll stick with us for like 20 seconds. Okay, so I don't want to spend any more time on that, but I appreciate that. We're going to go to 7.2, and that has to do with a letter from Parks Canada and addressing the private home accommodations. The letter from Parks Canada. 7.2, who would like to lead that part of the discussion? Mr. Greathead?
Good morning again, Council.
Morning. Wish it
Oh,
was.
just afternoon now. Parks Canada has requested Council's input on how we go about the private home accommodations. And specifically, there's 4 questions that they're seeking Council's input on. And they're listed in the package. Question 1 is, does Council support making changes to the public home accommodations in order to increase the town's housing supply? Number 2, what does Council intend to do with taxation and other fees with regards to PHAs? On a go-forward basis, how would you like to see PHA defined as a secondary suite, which may be rented monthly or nightly and must meet safety codes, or as 1 or more rooms within the owner's home without a separate entrance and cooking facilities? If it's defined as a secondary suite, a cap on numbers will be necessary to ensure the rentals are available for residents. And the 4th question that they're seeking an answer to is, what will Council commit to in terms of compliance with PHA business licenses? So that's the request from Parks at this point.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wilson.
Is there a representative from Parks Canada at the meeting today to answer questions? I don't think so.
No, I don't believe so.
I do have a couple comments on a few of the questions, and it could just for the record, really, and maybe a few questions go back to Parks themselves. I guess my first question to them would be, has there been any research done on how changes to PHA requirements will impact housing prices in town? I think we're at a pretty fragile economic situation right now, and I think I don't support undermining the market during this unstable economic time. I just don't feel that this is definitely not the time to shake it up. I think allowing PHAs for so many years has inflated the value of homes in Jasper, and drastic changes will cause instability in real estate prices and value. So it's a larger question, I think, and I don't think that they've answered those questions appropriately or broadly enough. Sorry, I just got a couple notes here. Bear with me. My question to them as well. So they've asked us, does Council support making changes to PHAs to increase housing supply? Now, I don't feel that making changes to PHAs really effectively increases housing supply. It's my opinion, of course, but my question back to Parks would be, does Parks Canada support moving forward on phase 2 of the accessory dwelling unit proposal? So they've moved forward on the 1, which is pretty straightforward, and it's effective only really in new home builds. Modifying existing houses into legal secondary suites is quite cost prohibitive. So I think if we want to see any kind of movement and any benefit to supplying ADUs, we have to be moving forward on phase 2, which is allowing garden suites or garage suites, and that will effectively increase housing supply. That makes a lot of sense. And so I feel that this is a positive, effective way to increase housing supply, and I support it. I just don't feel like we should be targeting PHAs at this point. I don't think it's going to effectively offer the solution we need. And then I guess finally, compliance. So I really don't support acting as the compliance officer in this regard. I feel that compliance on land use issues should fall within the agency that controls land use and planning, period. I do support enforcing if we had the opportunity to have control over land use and planning, for sure. That's our responsibility. But at this point, it's Parks Canada's responsibility to enforce. And honestly, I think they're asking us to be the bad guy here. And I just can't get behind that.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And you know what, this is like, I think we have a really well-rounded council, and this is where, like, you know, if you're carrying the ball on this one, I'm right behind you on this, because and I don't want to get into this tennis match where we're going back and forth with questions and no one's answering the questions, right? But it's very difficult to address a lot of those questions being asked without, you know, looking at a bigger picture. And I really appreciate what you're addressing. And I think that we need to talk a little bit more upfront with Parks Canada. If that ends up having another virtual meeting, it's difficult to, we can't do things in public right now anyway. So it might be easier to get everybody in a conversation where we can, you know, try to address some of their concerns, but, you know, having them giving us the opportunity to address those very questions and areas that you brought up. Because otherwise, if we just start writing back and forth, we're not going to get anywhere. And I think that we have developed a good enough relationship with Parks Canada to be able to have open dialogue in these areas and come with a little bit more progress than where we're sitting at. So thank you. Mr. Greathead, you wanted to address something, and then Councillor McGrath.
Sorry, I'm just paying attention and taking notes here.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor McGrath.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Demota, and it's great to have an opportunity to speak to this on a municipal agenda, as it's an area that we often don't get to speak to in council meetings because it does pertain to land use and planning. And I think in order to answer these 4 questions for Parks Canada, it's probably going to be really difficult, and it's probably going to be really difficult to have consensus of council in how we formulate an answer for Parks Canada, as there is such a variety of and diversity of perspectives and desires for the community moving forward. I would respectfully disagree with Councillor Wilson in housing prices coming down being detrimental. I think that for the livelihood of my children and carrying on the affordability of our next generation to be able to stay in our community, something has got to give. And I'm hopeful that one day the next generation of Jasperites will be able to buy houses in our community and afford the houses in our community. In regards to question number 4, Councillor Wilson points out the exact vulnerability that our community has. We have the tools and we have the means to enforce and look for compliance, but we don't have Part 17 of the Municipal Government Act, and we strive for it. We want it. This council has made it really, really clear to both our residents and to Parks Canada that we want to be the authority for land use and planning, and we do have the capabilities to enforce and look for compliance within our community because we have such a strong bylaw services department. So I'm happy to have this before us. I know that my perspective on housing isn't necessarily shared by everyone, but I'm happy to be able to voice and represent the community members that do have a similar position as I.
and that's what makes it so well-rounded, I feel. Councillor Wilson, did you have anything to counter in that point of view? Okay. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to see this issue in front of us. I believe it's an issue where in the community there's a level of concern and dissatisfaction which has been present for a number of years. PHA, private home accommodations, and other home-based businesses do affect the housing supply. I don't think there can be any doubt of that. That is offset by benefit to those homeowners who engage in private home accommodations, because it does, of course, contribute to their income and their ability to afford housing. So it's a double-edged sword. But to the extent that it may have inflated home values over the years, it is detrimental to people who would desire to get into the housing market. So I think we have to acknowledge that there is an effect. I think it's an important conversation. And I think that the questions that we have in front of us deserve our attention, but I think the questions we have in front of us are too vague for us to really consider without more information from Parks Canada. And I would suggest that we ask Parks Canada to come to a meeting and present to council and provide for us some context, the context behind the questions that they're asking. For example, number one, ask if we would be supportive of making changes to PHAs, but I think it would be helpful to know what sort of changes they have in mind. Much of the change that might be made to that regulatory regime is not ours to make, so we would have to understand what sort of changes they're looking for and what they think that the impact on the housing supply might be if we were to support those changes. Question 4, what will council commit to in terms of compliance with PHA business licenses? Councillors have pointed out, and they're correct, that we don't have land use planning and development authority. So there are limits to our authority to enforce anything. However, we do have business licensing authority. This community asked for and received authority to administer business licensing in 2008. And so there has to be some compliance factor to that. And I think that to deny our responsibility there is not helpful. We share responsibility for these authorities with Parks Canada because we do grant the business licenses for these businesses. So I think it would be helpful to ask Parks Canada to come and have a conversation with us and to flesh out the details and provide for us some context for the questions that they're asking. I think the letter is intended as nothing more than a request to open a dialogue and begin a conversation. The last thing I want to talk about is question 2. The question about taxation with respect to home-based businesses is a really important one. I have been exploring this since I came on council and looking deeply into it. My level of confidence with respect to the assessment of home-based businesses in Jasper is extremely low. A fair and equitable assessment process is the foundation of fair taxation. It is extremely important that every taxpayer have a level of confidence that their and their neighbors' houses and businesses are assessed for taxation purposes in a fair and equitable manner. My confidence that that is the case with respect to home-based businesses, and in particular with respect to private home accommodations, is extremely low. I've attempted to raise this with our assessor on a couple of occasions, but have not met with any success at seeing some change there. It is primarily an assessment issue. Private home accommodations right now are assessed on an entirely arbitrary basis. Some minor proportion of the value of the house is subjected to commercial taxation, 5% or 10% usually. But I don't think that meets the provincial standard. I don't think we are in compliance with the MGA and the matters. The other piece of legislation is called MRAP, the matters relating to assessments. I don't think we're in compliance. The provincial government has determined that assessments of mixed use buildings, as I understand it, should be assessed based on the relative space within the building that is used for different purposes. And we're simply not doing that. I understand that doing so won't be easy, but I think it's the minimum requirement. I think we ought to be doing that. I don't think we are. Our current contract with the assessment firm that we use is up at the end of this year. We extended it for a year. And I think it is an ideal time for us to look into how we can do a better job of assessing the homes that are conducting business in a way that is more fair and equitable. Because otherwise, those who do not engage in that business are being unfairly impacted by making up the difference in the tax envelope. So I would like to see us have the conversation. I'd like to see Parks Canada come and visit and provide us context for the conversation and then open the discussion. Doesn't mean we're committed to any particular answer at this point to those questions, but I think they're fair questions for us to attend to. So I would propose that we invite Parks Canada to a future community of the whole to present to us and provide context for the questions and the conversation to come.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I have Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Jeanneau with their hands up. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for this level of discussion, and I agree with you. We should invite someone to come and engage in some dialogue with us, and if that's not something that's desirable, we need to have the conversation regardless, and by whatever means necessary, I think. Councillor Wilson.
Well, no, I'd just like to say I agree with, for the most part, with what Councillor Butler had mentioned. But mostly the fact that we have to have the conversation with Parks Canada in attendance. Although, unfortunately, what occurs between now and that conversation and future conversations is a full halt on any type of private home accommodations applications. Most likely sales of houses are in limbo because you don't want to sell a house if with the PHA license, because you know that PHA license won't be issued to the new owner. So unfortunately, it really is a stall on all PHA business at this point. You know, if you have your license, you carry on with your license, but it does really put a halt to unfairly, really, to any type of current business or current applications, etc. You know, and how long is this conversation gonna carry on? Months, most likely. So I would suggest that parks operate business as usual, have the conversations, and then make a call after that. But just putting a halt to things arbitrarily is unfair. If we want to talk about fairness, that's unfair. Halting any type of application, halting any type of PHA business is really unfair, and we're going to have conversations for sure for months. Yet people can't carry on with everyday business. I don't or feel very strongly against having these conversations quickly and making these decisions quickly, because it does affect a lot of people.
I agree, and you know, it's unfortunate, and the more argument we have that having that land use and planning element being outside of our municipal jurisdiction and operations is just completely inadequate, and the federal government shouldn't be in the business of running a community. It's out of their wheelhouse, and it's more designed for municipalities to have that in their portfolio. So it just creates an odd quagmire and stuff. And you know, maybe this, even though we need to move things forward in a quicker manner, we may need to like move this up the chain and discuss a little bit more of a level playing field as compared to Banff, because there are only two municipalities that are in federal jurisdiction. And I think that having that dichotomy, that difference between what they have and what we have, even though we settled that in 2000, and when we settled for that, it's just proving to be just unworkable in a lot of areas. So, and particularly regarding sales of houses and people's livelihoods here, it's frustrating. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In addition to some of the comments that have been made, I have two comments. I agree that business should go on as usual from what Parks Canada is doing. I mean, there's been housing shortages for 50, 60 years. I think our mayor can attest to that. And we've always managed to find a way to do that. And one of the ways was to private home accommodation. And they've been allowed. Yes, they have maybe done something, affected the price of the houses, but I think we should continue to do that. I don't think we should be making any changes. I'm a bit disappointed that Parks, who administers land use, is using these questions to kind of conquer and divide council to suit their needs here. Basically, in a nutshell, we should probably be ignoring this. But no, they're asking us, and we want to work in good relations, like they indicate in the last lines, that we want to together to solve the community problems. So I'm willing to do that. I think one of the things that I know we've had housing studies done by the community and so on and so forth, but somewhere along the way, we should present a model of what we think PHAs and accessory suites and all that stuff, what it should look like, rather than just answering the feedback and the proposals that are submitted by Parks. Now, I know it would involve a lot of things, but I think there's a lot of good heads on this council that have some pretty good ideas on what it should look like. And maybe that's something that I think we should have a position of what it should look like before we start answering questions that are just going to dissect us and divide and conquer. Thank you. That's
a very interesting perspective, and I appreciate that. Mayor Ireland, you had your hand up. You'd like to speak?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota. I confess I may not be very articulate. I do want to express just how significant and important it is to have this letter on our agenda. And I express profound gratitude to Parks Canada for sending us this letter, knowing that it goes on a public agenda and begins this discussion. However, my sense is that the more we engage on the particular questions, the more we allow Parks Canada to frame the discussion. I think the importance of those questions simply serves to underscore the overall importance of community planning resting in the hands of the community. If we don't use this as a launching point to renew our discussions about the transfer of jurisdiction over land use planning and development to the community, we will take a huge step backwards, whether we help them fix this problem or not. I welcome the opportunity to have them at the table, but I would say we deal with the underlying premise that these are matters of extreme significance at the community level. How they remain in the hands of Parks Canada is a mystery to me. I mean, we had this argument 20 years ago, as you said, Councillor Demota, but it has never been a satisfactory response. But I do not see that how private home accommodation is configured and dealt with in the community is integral to the way a national park works. I don't see a solid argument for Parks Canada to not give jurisdiction over these issues to the community, so that we would then become like every other community, save one, in the country. I think this is an opportunity. I thank Parks Canada for having presented it to us. I think we should use this to renew really serious discussions about the transfer of jurisdiction, because at the end, if the community does not gain control of these sort of interests, we will never meet what Parks Canada has invited us to do, and that is meet the community's best interest. So I welcome the opportunity, but I am inclined to steer clear of the specifics, get back to the underlying generality, which is a transfer of jurisdiction. These are questions that ought to be resolved at the community by the community.
Right, and how do we get there? without going up the chain, because I mean, the people on the ground level here, I think their intention and their desire is to help us and for the greater benefit of the community. But I mean, their hands are tied to the powers above them. And if we can't address what you're talking about, Mr. Mayor, with locally, then we have to find another way. And for me, it's been beating my head against the wall for 13 years with little result. And that's no fault to the people that are here in Jasper. And we need to open up this dialogue at a higher level. Councillor Butler, you had your hand up.
Thanks, and I want to say I agree with all of that. This issue highlights more than any other possibly just how difficult, fractious, and frankly, in some ways unworkable the shared jurisdiction over, or sorry, it's not really a shared jurisdiction, but the fact of Parks Canada's jurisdiction over land use planning and development is. I want to point one thing out only, which is that the second question here with respect to taxation is something that lies completely within the municipality's jurisdiction and really can and possibly should be discussed separately from the issue around regulations. It is an area where we have entire jurisdiction, and as I mentioned earlier, I feel that we have not exercised that jurisdiction as effectively as we ought to, and frankly, according to the expectation of the governing legislation from the province. So I think that is an area that we have to acknowledge that we own entirely.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jeannot, you have your microphone unmuted. Did you want to speak? Or
Nope.
okay, no, that's fine. Well, you know, considering, you know, this level of discussion and the gravity of it, we have a few more agenda items still on the to address here, and moving forward to getting to those is driving us well past our lunch hour. And you know, I'm taking administration's time into account here as well as our time. And I don't know if there's a desire to move through this quickly, wrap it up by as close as we can to 1 o'clock, or take a half hour or so and then come back to this. We still have an organizational meeting and another commitment to get to this afternoon. So I'm open to any idea for direction here. Because if it was up to me, I would muscle through this, but I am taking into consideration administration's time and the rest of your time as well. Any feedback? Keep going? Okay. All right. So, Councillor Butler.
I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor Demota, are you referring to looking for direction on item 7.2, or are you moving past to the next item?
Well, I'm not moving to 7.3. I just wanted to get a consensus of how council was feeling. And okay, so what's our direction here for 7.2? Do we ask administration to invite Parks Canada to the next committee of the whole, to the next regular meeting? Do we want to set up another intergovernmental? Are we giving direction, Mayor Ireland?
Although I appreciate that the issue has come forward at the initiation of Parks Canada, and we shouldn't sit on it for long. It seems to me that it ties directly to a number of our strategic priorities. I would like to defer it to have a discussion as it relates to those priorities, although I'm not entirely sure when we're next scheduled to meet in that capacity as looking at strategic priorities, but it goes to relationships in particular. I'd also like to defer it, even if it's just to another committee of the whole, It's important that it was on the public agenda today. It will get circulated to some extent through the community. I would anticipate that we might get some feedback. And before we take any specific response to the question, I'd like to at least give the public an opportunity to comment. So whether we defer it to the next committee of the whole or specifically to our next strategic priorities session would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll leave it to that. I believe if we continue down the same path, that would put us on the third Tuesday of November. Councillor Butler.
Well, I'm disappointed at an essentially nearly complete lack of uptake on this issue. I think it's a really important issue. And I thought that the suggestion of having Parks Canada come and at least contextualize this for us in the near future was at least worthy of consideration.
I agree, and that's where I was kind of unclear on what we were going forward with the path, because there have been suggestions out there, and we didn't really settle on anything, but that's why I asked the question. And if we have recommendation from the mayor in that sense, then that's fine, but I would like some clarification on the questions. And because just to quote the mayor earlier, from a different discussion, it should be clear to the public to what is being discussed. And I think that there could be a little bit more dialogue on some of those questions, even though I am also apprehensive into engaging into those specifics. But it seems like we're caught in a catch-22 either way. Councillor Kelleher, MP.
Just listening to the conversation, and Marilyn was saying that he'd like more input from the public or community. So maybe we should invite Parks Canada to a committee of the whole, have them talk more about these questions, community can listen in, and then they have more input. They'll hear more of where Parks Canada is coming from and more on our thoughts on it, and then we look forward to their input. But really, we're just going to get their input back on those questions, not hearing from Parks Canada.
Would there be an ability that when we're doing our budget presentations to the community to have it more of an a town, what do they call it, the a town hall type of setup, and then maybe have that those particular questions with Parks Canada available? I'm not sure. I'm just throwing out ideas here because I'm just seeing some type of lack of direction here. So are we okay? So we wait until our next strat plan meeting. We don't have, like Councillor Butler, I think he was suggesting that we should have Parks Canada next community of the whole. Mr. Mayor.
I only proposed what I thought was in our interests, and I hesitate to engage on the specific questions unless we have confirmed that that's where we want to go. But I respect entirely the position that Councillor Butler has put forward, that we have this opportunity. We could easily invite Parks Canada to the next meeting. So I'm not suggesting that the fact that I would prefer to consider our position, whether we want to engage at all on their terms of reference or set our own, to be worthy of some further discussion. But I'm only making one proposal, and there are 7 of us. So I am open. And if council wants to invite Parks Canada to give us further details, that's perfectly appropriate. I just hesitate, and I suggest that the deeper we get into the specifics, the more we lose the opportunity to deal with the more general. But whatever, I would welcome Parks Canada at the very next meeting if they're able to come.
Okay, Councillor Butler. Then Councillor Junot.
All I would request from council is that we don't just defer this issue and let it drop. So I'm happy with, I would be happy with almost any next step as long as it's a step. If council isn't comfortable having a public presentation and public conversation with Parks Canada yet, and we wish to bring this back at a future meeting to discuss further, perhaps allowing time in the interim to discuss this at the strategic level, as it is an intergovernmental concern, I'm satisfied with that. I just don't want to leave it hanging. I would like to be a next step. I think that's really all I'm asking for.
I agree. And you know what? I think we're hamstringing ourselves or handcuffing ourselves to having these regimented, hard set meeting dates. And I struggle with the same issue that I do with tackling the budget. Like if we're saying, oh, we're not going to meet till December 15th of 2021, and we're set on that, it's not going to get us anywhere. So if we need to meet earlier, we have the ability to do virtual meetings, which may expedite, some of this stuff. So we don't need to go drive down or ride our bikes down or walk down to a central meeting place now. So I think that meeting is a lot easier, whether, we spend a couple hours one evening or an afternoon to discuss some of these things so we can move forward. We have the opportunity to do that. So bumping it down the road, whether it's next week or other that, I'm with the mayor. We should probably agree on what it is we want to do before answering those questions. If that's the direction we want to go, then we do that. But to invite Parks Canada, I'd like to hear from them to address some of these questions. But are we ready for that? Are we collectively, like Councillor Junot said, about being divided and potentially conquered on these issues? Definitely need more discussion. And I think we need to address that, because I don't want to drag this conversation today any longer than it needs to be, but we need to keep moving on. However, this is an important topic. I've got Councillor Junot and then Councillor McGrath. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mayor Arlen's that if we get into answering the specifics, the more we give away in what we want, which is our ultimate goal, which is land use and planning control from one tip to the other. And we can invite Parks Canada to maybe provide more information, answer some of the questions, like how many units are we talking about, blah, 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 how does that evolve, et cetera, et cetera. But to be answering any specifics to me is not what we want. We want give us more data so that we can find a way in which we can take control of this. Thank you.
Right, but and also to address Councillor Wilson's concern, like the longer we take could put people and their homes at jeopardy or potential ownership. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota. I agree with Mayor Ireland and other councillors, and I agree with Councillor Butler as well. I think it's all really important. It's both important to have these public discussions for our residents, to have information and to see with full transparency what's happening at these conversations with Parks Canada and the municipality. But also a strategy needs to be applied here, and the strategy needs to be strong. This is one of the bigger things that will help us move forward as a community to be sustainable and to be a real community with a community plan, and to have everything that we need to successfully maintain this level of local government. But it's not necessarily at the top of my brain what I can say is the proper strategy. I would even suggest this might even require a strategic consultant to help us through the strategic plan and in the way we deal with this. It's one of the bigger issues that we will be facing as this council, and it is the correct time. You know, how long will it take to get that strategy in place and to have a formal meeting with the CAO of Parks Canada to express this letter of questioning from Parks Canada and our tools in order to provide what's needed to our community as a great level of service? Because we have what it takes to move the community forward. We just need the right meetings with the right people. So I don't have any contacts with the CAO of Parks Canada, but I know that we do as a collective. And I would think that we should be engaging either a strategic consultant or the CAO or both at our earliest convenience. You know, this afternoon we should be sending emails, get on it and move forward. And as soon as we can formulate what our plan might be, that might lead us to when that conversation with Parks Canada should be appropriate at the community level in an open committee of the whole format.
I agree with you. So I would like to propose that after our council meetings today, that we set up a next meeting for the next meeting. So I would like to propose something on Thursday. I know that there's some time constraints with many councillors, but if we can find some common time before next Tuesday or whatever it is, I'd like to visit that through one of our committees, whether it's legislative or something that gives us the ability to work within, you know, our within the MGA to hold a meeting. You know, I wouldn't consider it an emergency meeting, but it's definitely, there's a few things that we need to get addressed in a very short time, and that's what I propose, because we need to get moving on, and I don't want to take away from the importance of this agenda item. So is everybody agreeable with that? We just look at trying to get something done and figure out a strategy, because I want to propose, you know, maybe hiring a lobbyist or something like that, but that will have to come at a different time, because that's a whole different level of discussion, and that'll take quite some time to discuss. Okay. All right. So having said that, are we done with 7.2 for now? Okay, let's move to 7.3, fruit trees. Mr. Greathead, I appreciate your patience. Go ahead, sir.
Sir, if we can just circle back to the previous discussion, what do you want from administration at this point, or what's my move going forward? It was just very wide ranging, and I don't know what the will of council is at this point.
Well, I did propose for us to meet, and I don't think that we really collectively are set on any way or another, and I think that's for us to figure out before we get you to start calling people and inviting them to meetings and stuff, because I think we're still a little stretched on that. And I'm with Councillor McGrath. We need to have a strategy.
All right.
Is that reflective? Is everybody okay with that? Councillor Keller-Hempy?
I'm also a little confused, sir. Councillor Demota, are you proposing that we meet on Thursday for a strat, as part of our strat plan meeting to move this forward?
Sure.
So that way, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a time in? Later in the day is better for me.
Right. So I thought that was going to take more time to get settled here today. That's why I proposed doing that. Like, I want to address things with the gravity that they should be addressed with, and we have some time constraints today. And I'm just taking into consideration administration. People need breaks here. We've been going at this since 9:30, and we could probably have a marathon all day as councillors, but it's not fair to the other people that are here helping us conduct this meeting. So either we take a half-hour break, or we move through the agenda and we decide to get through the details so that we're not getting muddied. We're getting mucky here. And Councillor Butler.
I suggest we bring it up at our next regularly scheduled strategic planning meeting. I think that's on the 3rd Tuesday of each month. And then we
Okay,
can
all right.
provide further direction to Mr. Greathead following that, or in our next regular
Okay, I
meeting.
see some thumbs up and some head nods. Mayor Ireland?
Although I will happily comply with that suggestion if there is still an underlying sense of urgency, and I think there may well be. I would be also comfortable directing Mr. Greathead to invite Parks Canada to our next committee of the whole. And in the interim, we arrange to meet as strategic priorities committee, because I fully agree that this is a matter of strategic importance. And I think before we meet with Parks Canada, we must have an opportunity to discuss our strategy moving forward. But if we want to do that on an expedited basis and invite Parks Canada to a subsequent meeting where we will hopefully have our strategy at least confirmed among ourselves, I'm fine with that. If it waits till the next strategic priority meeting, which is late November, that's a month away. It's not unworkable. I can live with that. But if there's an appetite for something quicker, I think we could achieve that as well.
Yeah, I think those dates on the 3rd Tuesday was something that was set up by our outgoing CAO, and that was proposed. And I don't think that we did have a hard set date for that. I was saying moving forward, traditionally, that's when we've been meeting. So we don't really have a date set. And I was just trying to propose something earlier. If we want to wait till then, that's fine with me too. We can, heck, let the next council deal with it. Mr. Greathead, you're okay with that? You understand the direction that the mayor's proposed?
So I'm going to reach out to Parks, and I'm looking at the next committee of the whole meeting. Our date is November 27th. So that gives administration a month, or sorry, the council a month to have a strategy planning session in the meantime, if that will work.
I have the next committee of the whole as November 10th. Is it something obstructing that, or?
I believe those are the special meeting dates for the budget, the 9th and 10th.
During the day?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well,
I saw. Oh, sorry. Those ones are at night. Those budget meetings are at night, so we could have that on the 10th
if they're available and willing.
Okay, I will get that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Butler, does that satisfy? You have your. It looks like you wanted to speak.
I guess that that brought back to mind the question of the public budget presentations. We had some conversation about, and yes, that's fine with me, but it's made me think of the public budget presentations. We had some conversation about that date being too early. I am hesitant about having public budget presentations when I don't think we will have a budget to present to the public. So I think we should reconsider that. I can't see any way that we can meet that schedule and have a productive public meeting on the 9th and 10th.
Well, when we only meet once a week, we're always caught in these things of taking another week to figure something out, and it's frustrating. Like, this is where I'm frustrated. So do we go back to agenda item 6.1 now? Or, I don't know. I want to keep moving forward. So if we're just gonna, if we want to stay obligated to our next meetings next week, then we will decide it then. We're not, I don't know where to go. I'm trying to get this meeting going, and it's one step forward, two steps back.
I apologize.
Councillor McGrath. No, that's fine. Councillor McGrath, and then Mayor Ireland.
I'm curious from administration's point of view, Deputy Mayor Demota, if we decide on a number and council has an agreement on and a request for direction on November 3rd, does that provide administration with enough time to still have our budget meetings as scheduled on November 9th and 10th, or is that not possible? I think that moving it forward in November was very responsible for me. I had a lot of community members express their discontent last year with late November budget meetings getting into the Christmas season and how late it felt in the calendar year. So I was really pleased to see it in the early November, but of course, if it doesn't work for administration, we need to reconsider.
Thank you, Mayor Arlen.
Thank you. I thought there was a question there from Councillor McGrath that I was anticipating administration might answer. That is whether the 9th and 10th are even achievable at this stage.
I can take that one, Deputy
Yeah,
Mayor.
I believe that was discussed last week. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor Demota, through to Councillor McGrath. It all depends on the outcomes of the 3rd, but I would suggest that we would require more time. So that's essentially a week from that target number that council might give us next week. And if no changes are required, if the target number is a lot like the $8.4 million, then the operating budget is, I wouldn't suggest is ready, but a lot of the background work has been done, and it could be for discussion the following week. But ultimately, that timeline would vary. It is getting a bit tight. Our initial recommendation was to delay those meetings, but again, it depends on council's decision next week.
Okay. Did someone
Thank
else
you.
have their hands up?
Well, I was going to speak only to say that I think those dates, I mean, they've been set for about a year as placeholders. I don't think they've been actioned in any sense. I would just suggest that we retain them as long as we can. If we're able to make use of them, that would be great. But if by next week it becomes apparent that we can't, then we reschedule at that time. But nothing has been done in any event. There's no investment other than the fact that all of council and maybe some of the community has slotted away their own time to be available if those proceed. But other than that, it's just a placeholder.
Okay, thank you for that. And, I apologize if it's apparent that I'm becoming hypoglycemic here. Are we comfortable with where we're at in the agenda? Mr. Greathead, are you okay with what's been discussed? Do you have direction? Do you understand what we need?
Yes, I've been paying attention, and I will be circling back with Ms. Byrne to make sure that I haven't missed anything. But I believe that we got a grasp on it.
Okay. Your mic was unmuted, so I thought you wanted to speak, and hopefully you did, and that was getting addressed. Can we move to agenda item 7.3, or do we take a break here? Move on? Okay. 7.3, fruit trees.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We had a request from, or an offer of assistance and labor to remove some of the fruit trees in town. And this is it. The notification came quick, so and their seasonal staff are only available until November 1st. But Parks would like to get moving on some of the removal of some of the trees. And the priority trees that they are selecting right now are ones that have had bears in them in the recent past. And specifically, they're alluding to offering to remove the pin cherry trees at the fire hall and the trees near the playground at the 1100 block of Patricia. And I just wanted to remind council that we brought this to council last year, and there was a fair bit of community concern. It was a polarizing event, sorry, polarizing topic. It's either a hard yes, remove the trees, or a hard no, leave them all. So at this point, I believe that I can handle this administratively on these two sites, due to the fact that there has been bears in those trees in the past, and the whole larger discussion of the fruit trees in general in Jasper can be brought up again at a further point. So I'm just kind of at this point asking council if there's any concerns with me going ahead and taking care of these two sites.
Well, I have an issue just because of the understanding. Like, I'm not sure where the term pin cherry came from, but and that, if that's the designation for that those particular trees, then so be it. But the ones by the fire hall, are those the ones that are next to the Hakone commemorative post that we have there? The two that that have cages around them?
I'm not sure on that one. I can go take a look. I'm just not familiar with that presently. Which one parts is specifically citing? Right.
So I think that those trees were removed from the main boulevard across from the totem pole, and those were initially we broke ground with the mayor and or deputy mayor. I believe it was the deputy mayor of Hakone and Mayor Ireland. We planted, I believe, 1 or 2 cherry trees on the beginning of that boulevard, and they were moved. And I believe those were moved from those were part of our commemoration to our sister city relationship. So if those are the trees and they are causing harm, maybe we can look at some type of coniferous tree that Jasper and Hakone share, and maybe, you know, conduct some communication with them on the replanting of those trees if we need to physically remove them because they're causing harm for the community. That's before we just decide to lop them off. There needs to be some political consideration there. And then in regards to the ones in 1100 block of Patricia, I know that there were some concerns from the residents that were addressed last year, and I would hate to just ignore that and move forward, but we do have some time constraints here. Anyone else? Councilor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Demota. I'm not positive. Of course, I wouldn't have this information because I don't work for Parks Canada, but last year there was significant concerns about bears in town. What did we experience this fall? I don't feel like I observed or heard of it as much this year. I'm curious if there was just as much of a concern or if there had been maybe less incidents this year.
Deputy Mayor, to speak to Councillor McGrath's question, my understanding is that there was a lack of the buffalo berries. It was just kind of a drought for their staple food last year, and the bears ended up really frequenting town. I understand that there were a few that had to be destroyed that had become nuisance bears. So this year, last year I was flooded with calls, and it was, you know, it was one of those things where everyone was talking about the bear walking down the street all last autumn. This year, I haven't had any official calls and anecdotally, I haven't really noticed any bears or heard any talk of them in town this year.
Okay, but we do have a request coming forward from Parks Canada to remove or deal with those cherry trees that you specified.
Yes, there's an offer of assistance from the Jasper National Park crew, and again, they're only available for the next 4 or 5 days. So I just wanted to bring this forward anyways, have the discussion.
Anyone else? I don't know what direction to give you here, other than if we can't take advantage of it in the next 4 days, and I'm sorry with adding more to your plate with the material I just gave you, but I don't want to hinder the process either, but I don't want to upset people at the same time. I've got Councillor McGrath and Councillor Journeau. Go ahead, Councillor McGrath.
Well, in a committee of the whole format, it's hard to make decisions, and it seems as though this is a request to make a decision and versus maybe group consensus. And I don't know enough about how the community feels. I know, last year when it was brought forward, as Mr. Great had stated, it was very divided on how people felt about it. And I know some of the residents that were quite affected by it, it was really near and dear to their heart. So I would hate to make a decision today that affected someone's quality of life in relation to the habitat around their house. I don't feel like I have enough information or knowledge in tree and environmental and animal protection to really make a decision that's more than just on a whim on this subject. But I also don't want to lose the opportunity of the next 4 days of work being done that would contribute to a more positive community. So I really don't know exactly what to do here.
You and me both. Councillor Journeau.
We live in a national park, and part of our responsibility is to maintain things as close as possible to nature. If fruit trees have been introduced and they're causing a problem and changing the balance of nature, they should be removed. And we have lots of privileges in Jasper National Park of living here and enjoyment, but fruit trees may be one that we have to do without. So I would suggest that Mr. Greathead be authorized to deal with the available offer and remove the fruit trees that are considered to be a problem. Thank you.
Okay. So with Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
With one slight exception, I support what Councillor Journeau has said. I mean, we have had our municipal staff remove all sorts of dangerous trees in recent months and years. These particular fruit trees are potentially a danger to children playing around a park or other users of public spaces. They're also a danger to the bears, and bears have been destroyed as a result of it. So we have set a precedent of eliminating danger in the community where we can. This is just another step in that direction. I would like to see that commemorative tree preserved for now, and we could figure out whether, if it's on the chopping block, so to speak. But I would like to see some effort to preserve that, because it does have significance in another way, and maybe we can find a way, if it's one of the trees that's in question, to keep bears from getting close to it. I can't imagine that people are using the fruit from these trees as a food source. And this is not a statement about people having fruit trees in their own yards, but this is land somewhat under our control, although it still belongs to Her Majesty. It seems to me that it is a measure of safety for our community, and we have an offer to do it for free. I think we should move forward.
I agree. So do we give Mr. Greathead a nod to proceed as administration to deal with this accordingly? Okay, I have a nod, consensual nod. And if we could find out whether in actuality that tree was moved, or I believe it was. So we just look at the first tree on the boulevard across from the info center and the totem pole there. If I believe that used to be a cherry tree, and if it's not, and it hadn't got moved, then we just move forward.
I will look into
but I
that.
believe it was. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Make it so, number one. I wasn't wanting to say that. Okay. So now I've lost my agenda here. We're moving on to agenda item 8. And I believe that's new business, although it's lost on my other device here. Other new business. Does anyone have anything to add for discussion today? All right. Correspondence. Other than the Parks Canada letter that we had on the agenda, I don't see anything else coming in or has come in. Council representation on various boards and upcoming meetings, agenda item 10. Does anybody have anything to report? Not this week, save it for next week, thank you. Upcoming events, we've got our organizational meeting later after this meeting today, and then a potential 9 and 10, November 9 and 10 public budget presentation. Is there anything else that we need to add to highlight in upcoming events that we should be addressing in the community? All right. Having none, I will welcome a motion to adjourn, but then we need to decide when we're going to come back and sit as in our organizational meeting capacity. So can we do that and then sign the rest of the people off and just stay on for a few minutes here? Ms. Nadala, do we have the capability of doing that?
I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, could you please repeat the request?
I would like to motion to adjourn, and could we kick everybody else out so that we can set a meeting time for our organizational meeting?
Well, organizational meeting is also a public meeting, and
okay.
there is a different link. There's a different Zoom link for that.
Oh, right. Okay.
Is at the top of that agenda. So adjourning and it providing an indication of when you would like to return would be helpful for staff and the public, certainly.
Does 2 o'clock work for everybody here? Okay. So 2 o'clock, we're going to re-adjourn, or actually we'll start our next organizational meeting. So may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Councillor McGrath, all in favor? None opposed. I see that we lost a councillor, but that's enough to clear us anyway. That's unanimous. We'll see you all back at 2 o'clock. Same, different time, different channel. Thank you for the debate today. And thank you for the community members and staff members for watching and being part of this. And for the future viewers, I hope this was entertaining for you.
Thank you.
Have a good